Welcome, everybody, to Imperial 80s. I'm so excited about today's episode. I have to be honest. Take a minute and like the video, subscribe to the channel if you have not already. Let me make sure. Yeah, I got the right mic. I had to check my own audio settings. Um, and put it in your socials. Share it with folks. If just let them know we're having this discussion. It should be, I think, a mix of all kinds of great things, from actual historical conversation to why this is such an insidious piece of propaganda, to stories about my childhood friends riding their dirt bikes around and going to the karate dojo run by Chuck Norris's stuntman, to all of the above. So anyway, of course, like, really excited about our guests today. I should say, and I'm sure they'll say something along these lines, but they were a bit reticent to do this movie, for, I think, good reasons, and they can talk about those. But one is that, of course, it is like absolute Hasbara. Like, it's just it's and the company. We'll get into the company, but very messed up story around the specific Canon films that makes this movie. And yeah, I mean, and I think Lara also, just not having seen it as a child and those kind of things, which better for that, I'm sure. But yeah, so we'll bring them up for a second. Let me just, anything you want to say? I'm going to introduce them.
No, I mean, I'm extremely excited. And I thank them for taking this, because I for a while have said this film is right there with Birth of a Nation. I've said this for a while. It's literally there. It's not like it's kind of like, no, like it's literally, if there's like a little like canon of Birth of a Nation films, the Delta Force is right there. And I'm very happy to be able to help prove that point with these two.
It's actually, yeah, I mean, that's an interesting comparison, because it's actually very similar in terms of
Yes,
exactly, like, the
100%.
plot. The plot is basically Birth of a Nation, right?
Yes, it's D.W.
Yeah.
Griffith logic, 100%.
um but in addition to that, well, yeah. Oh, somebody said to me this morning, they were like, I'm going to watch it. They were like, it can't be worse than Badge of the Assassin. And I was like, debatable. Like, there's definitely a debate to be had about that. they're both
Mhm.
they're both really awful, just to be clear. But yeah, it's up there. Um, all right. So our guests. So our guests today are Lara and Stephen Sheehi. Hang on, I'm getting background noise. Apologies, folks. So one thing I want to say, as I'm pulling this up, is that Lara's book, which we've been talking about for a couple of years, From the Clinic to the Streets, Psychoanalysis for Revolutionary Futures, is available now for pre-order from Pluto Press. And so there is a link for that in the show description. And I can't wait to read it. I'm sure it's going to be just awesome. And so I highly recommend that. Another thing too, folks probably see it behind me, but Stephen Sheehi, like, one of his books is Islamophobia, the Ideological Campaign Against Muslims. It has a preface by Mumia Abu Jamal and a foreword from Ward Churchill. I'm sure that he will bring up some things that he discusses in that book today. These are both great scholars and friends. Lara is a research fellow at the University of South Africa's Institute for Social and Health Sciences and the founding faculty director of the Psychoanalysis and the Arab World Lab. Um, they co-authored together Psychoanalysis Under Occupation, Practicing Resistance in Palestine, which won the Middle East Monitor's 2022 Palestine Book Award for Best Academic Book. There's more. I'm not going to read the full bios, but you can check them out in the show description. Lara is also a founding member of the collective for the Institute for the Critical Study of Zionism, which is also obviously very related to this topic today. Stephen Sheehi is an Arab anarcho-Marxist who works as the Sultan Qaboos professor of Middle East Studies at William and Mary, in Arabic Studies, Asian and Middle East Studies, and Asian and Pacific Islander American Studies. Bunch of other stuff, man. I could keep going on and on. Has written a number of books that relate to this, and has a forthcoming book that's entitled Intimacies of Guerrillas, Queer Objects of Palestinian Liberation. So without further ado, I'm going to bring these folks to the show. It's good to be with you.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining. Thank you for letting me put you through the trauma of watching this film.
Those flattering introductions were almost worth the pain.
Almost.
Also, yalla! That's what I'm here for. I'm ready.
Yeah. I actually don't want to say too much today because I know you both have like so many notes that you're going to want to go into on this movie. So I'm ready to actually just grab the popcorn and listen into a lot of this. But yeah, I mean, I guess we could start with like the basic question we usually start with is first impressions or experiences with this film. I'll start quickly. I know for some, like, I don't think Lara has, like, hers is last week or whatever. But what I would say for me is that I do actually think I saw this as a child, and my recollection of it is just watching my father kind of look at it like this is such a bad film. Like, you know, like the kind of thing like he's watching baseball on one channel and then he flips back because I have this memory, and I don't know if it was this movie or another movie, but I think it was this one, of him saying, "Oh, Lee Marvin is in this. I like Lee Marvin," and then like watching it and just being like, "This is ridiculous," So that's kind of my memory. I'll just say, like, beyond that, as I mentioned a little bit in the intro, Chuck Norris is somebody who actually, where I grew up in rural Southern Oregon, I was a somewhat popular figure. I had friends who watched Walker, Texas Ranger religiously, which is a terrible show. But it was big among, white, like, conservative young folks. And the other thing would be that the dirt bike stuff. And I guess the other part about the karate thing is that, as I mentioned, so a dojo in Medford, Oregon was Chip Wright's karate dojo, and he had his hair cut exactly like Chuck Norris. And the reason was because he was his stunt double in the 90s. I don't think he was a stunt double for this film. I think it started later than that, but this was kind of like a local micro celebrity thing when I was growing up. And so people would go to his karate dojo just on the strength of, like, well, he does Chuck Norris's stunts, right? Which sort of, like, yeah. So anyway, we'll have more of that as we go in, but that's kind of my 2 cents up front.
I'll jump in so I can let these two dive. So this was a movie that was very prominent, honestly, in my kind of sphere of watching things in the 80s. For 2 reasons. I would say, one, because Canon, and I'll talk about this a little bit, Canon was such an accessible film studio because of their mode of production. So they were constantly on cable and video rental. I mean, they kind of flooded the market, and they were kind of in that. So young teenage or boys or whatever, I mean, I was 6 when it came out, so I'm about 7 or 8 years old. It was, you got to watch this. Why? Because it's so violent. So it's so hyper violent. So it's like, yo, have you seen Delta Force though? They do this and they do that, and you're like, oh yeah, and you're watching this, and it becomes like trading cards of violence. Have you seen the latest like violent spectacle? Now, I can't recall if my dad knew I watched this movie. I don't think he would have been super happy if I watched it, but at the same token, he did let me watch Iron Eagle, which is also racist. So we can, so I can't give him a pass on that one. But I know it was a thing. We watched it, and then I didn't watch it for a very long time because it didn't interest me when I got older. And then about 7-8 years ago, I was doing a project that kind of has inspired this Imperial 80s thing. It came into my brain, and I was like, Delta Force. Remember that movie? I was like, yeah. And I decided to rewatch it, just knowing I probably wouldn't like it, but I wanted to kind of see the level. And I think within the first 15 minutes, I was just like, oh my goodness, this is Birth of a Nation. Like what is happening here? I was absolutely astonished. I mean, and I'll talk about it. One of the other big revelations was I was like, Robert Forster's in this movie? Okay, where is he in the movie? And then 30 minutes in, I go, that's fucking Robert Forster. And I had to like back up, right? And like, I think I actually paused the movie for a second and said, well, I have to completely reorient Robert Forster in my brain as an individual, right? And so that's really kind of where this movie, and ever since then, I've been really a proponent of not only this film being totally recognized as like a particular racist film, but also within a kind of general oeuvre of racist films, but then also canon writ large as a really disgusting, pernicious project overall that has a lot of legs into the industry now, even though, people want to write them off as failures or this kind of like lovable thing that didn't really work out. No, they've actually had a lot of influence from their model of production to the types of hyper-violent, imperial, and also just like end of civilizational ideas that they liked to put out that really raised a whole generation of people, who we dealing with a lot now online and in government, and so forth and so on. Yeah. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, here we go. I was thankfully spared this jingoistic trash, this imperial fantasy. I mean, the entire thing is a fucking imperial fantasy, right? Which I'm surprised actually, because my dad was a Chuck Norris fan, unfortunately. Yeah, he's that's a whole other conversation, and that's the psychoanalytic conversation to have about my dad's obsession with this shit. But I was spared this, and I do think there's a gendered component, because actually I should have asked my brother beforehand, but I imagine that he did watch this, right? But anyway, I was in Lebanon at the time, didn't watch this. So this was my first experience. And I'm glad that Jay and I talked about it before, and kind of I had this like preparation leading up to it. I knew it was going to be racist. Obviously, we live in a world now where you can kind of look backwards and read all the infrastructure that was built up until this moment. And this is one of those films. But my immediate thought, the first scene, I don't know if they spelled Tehran wrong. In the first fucking scene, it's spelled incorrectly. So despite the fact that it was hideously racist, so fucked up, and I have so many notes about it, I was actually laughing through the entire, the level of absurdity, right? The over the topness of it. I was laughing, but then also it sobers you, because you're like, holy shit, like this level over the top still does the insidious work of intrusions, of sort of setting up an entire mainstream, notion of who terrorists are, and goes right back to Gaza. I mean, I couldn't watch the thing without thinking about what's happening in Palestine, what's happening in Lebanon. Like, this is real life. This isn't just, I could sit there and laugh about Chuck Norris and how horrible of a fucking actor he is, and he is, and everything else is too. But the real world impact of it, and just how unjust and how saturated Hollywood and all these fucking films are with just the casual racism. And so there's this like double experience of watching it and seeing how absurd it is, and then also as an Arab, experiencing all the things that make our current moment what it is, right? And all the things that are able to happen. Like, this is part of the machinery of that. So it was a constant back and forth. Maybe the laughter was a defense. I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's buffoonish. It's buffoonish, but it's also, that's what Empire needs, right? It needs to be so over the top and buffoonish, and we're supposed to understand that as actually like good, like not buffoonish, right? Because that's how good American power is, right? I mean, I think for me, I'm a little older than you folks, so I was not 6 when the film came out. I was a teen, and I was a teen living in racist USA at a time where, following a decade and a half or a decade of Palestinian hijackings and these sorts of things, Palestinian resistance acts, and then comes the 80s, and Americans start to get blown up in Lebanon because they are occupying Lebanon for whatever reasons, etc. So I'm kind of that generation, and I think I never watched this film because for Arabs at that time, we already knew the script. The script was already there. We didn't have to watch it. We knew it was going to be grotesquely and pornographically anti-Arab. It was anti-Arabness again is it's an acceptable form of racism. I would argue that Islamophobia actually in the United States comes out of this orientalist anti-Arab tradition, not the opposite. But this is the moment where Islamophobia and anti-Arabism start to sort of coalesce into a more integrated discourse, imperialist discourse. I just want to also give like shout outs to it's something in some ways like what we are all going to say is nothing new. This is popular sort of thought or things known in the Arab American world. We grow up with this level of anti-Arab racism. It's very casual. Me, my kids, we've all been called terrorists starting in middle school. That's what we're called. If not other, like myself, other racial epithets, N-word or San, whatever. So this film is really just a natural expression of American racism that's accepted in the United States at this time, as absurd and pornographic and grotesque as it is. I want to give credit to Jack Shaheen, the late Jack Shaheen, who was a pioneer in sort of mapping out negative media representation of Arabs and Muslims in mainstream film and news. Again, I'm not talking representational politics, but I think at that surface level, it's just where we all enter into society. And I think Jack Shaheen's Real Bad Arabs is really the canonical piece, and in which he actually discusses Delta Force. Also, there's a really good, very short clip, about 6 minutes long, sort of a video short called Planet of the Arabs. So if you can watch this by Jay Saloom, I think it is. And it's really great. And it's a series of cuts. Probably, I think it's about 20 years old. I want to say around 20 years old, 25 years old. A series of cuts from all of the films that we grow up with, including a number of films from Delta Force, some of the more ridiculous ones, including the scene of where the stewardess is like confronting the bad terrorist, and we are freedom fighters, kind of making them as sort of absurd thing, and of course they're not. They're just pure terrorists, right? And also the part where the other guy says, my dream is to go to
the White House.
and rent a truck.
He speaks like the part. You're fast forwarding.
So all those are in real. It's a 6 minute. It's a completely great short. So it's called Real Planet of the Arabs, and it's fantastic. It's a fantastic production. But that's the social milieu in which it was to be raised. in the 80s. That was the social milieu that racialized me. And so it's just a pornographic piece of crap that we knew not even to look at.
So the unibrow didn't surprise you? The terrorist unibrow?
Thank you both. That's great. I mean, do you want to start us off on Canon, Mtume?
Yeah, I'll do a little bit of that. So honestly, if you are of a certain age, it was impossible to escape Canon movies. They were an independent studio that started in the Zionist entity in Israel, right there. They came in. It's if you want to. There's a doc about it called Electric Boogaloo. It's not a great doc in terms of analyzing truly, or even a good doc analyzing truly their pernicious activity, but you get bare bones history of it, and they're part of a kind of moment in Hollywood where they were kind of non-American capital was coming in, European capital was coming in, the studios were kind of struggling, LA was in a weird kind of situation, so you had different kinds of power players. And then I think also what we could see with Israelis trying to find ways to kind of come in and do stuff financially within the kind of sector. Them trying to kind of become power players, to kind of define what I would say is their Europeanness and so forth and so on. They're trying to kind of get involved in this kind of thing, which is really mass media, which we all know as part of empire and trying to establish yourself as legitimate empire, you have to do. So Canon becomes part of it. Early Canon films are highly sexualized, sexist, the abuse of women, and also I do mean abuse. I mean, if you listen to some of the actresses talk about their working on Canon films as some of the worst experiences of their lives, right? I mean, but also the imagery, juvenile would be kind, right? And then by the early to mid 80s, they kind of get into this space where they want to do, I think, more bombastic films. They want to kind of push things forward. They really want to do action movies, which is what they kind of become really known for. Also, I mean, some other films, which I'll just throw in there, but action films. So they develop the remakes of the Death Wish movies, which look, Death Wish 1 was racist enough, to be perfectly honest with you. I mean, and it's funny, people don't remember Death Wish. Death Wish was known as the right-wing movie of the 70s. It was a thing. So they kind of continue those. I mean, they just get more and more ridiculous, and the amount of sexual assault you get to watch it's just terrible, just so bad, right? And then they make a deal with Chuck Norris, begin with things like the Missing in Action film. So kind of what me and Jay have talked about before, more Vietnam, a history they start getting into. And then, Delta Force comes out of that, which I'll get to in a second. One other thing I want to add about Canon is their positioning within the kind of movie world really had also a lot to do with illegal capital coming in, things like junk bonds and stuff like that. So investments, people trying to hide money, hide investment money. I mean, it's really interesting stuff. Different writers have done stuff on this. It's really, really, if you dig within it, and it's like a big mess of stuff. Now to get to Delta Force a bit more specifically, because the thing that's really interesting about the movie is what they were able to get. So this is a movie made about $9 million. It was one of their bigger budget films at that time. Inflation now is about a $26 million movie, right? Which for an independent studio is not cheap, right? At that time, $26 million, $9 million in that time is pretty, so this is a Chuck Norris vehicle. This is a movie they really want to push Chuck Norris forward, really get him going. So they said, in quote, they wanted to basically line Chuck Norris with a bunch of stars, right? They wanted to put people around him. So I'm going to list you some names of actors who were in this movie, right? So we called Lee Marvin. People know Lee Marvin, Mr., big military movie man, you shouldn't be surprised he's in this movie. This is interesting because this is Lee Marvin. I mean, he passed away not too long after this movie, but this was kind of like his last one of his last things. And he has an interesting quote about doing the movie that I think is kind of telling. You have George Kennedy, right, who's in The Dirty Dozen, Cool Hand Luke, the Naked Gun films. He's a big lover of this movie. He talked about how much he loved doing this, how important it was, and so forth and so on. A really interesting one for film buffs is Hannah Shaigulia, who was, she plays the German flight attendant in the film. Hannah Shaigulia is actually a very well-known German new wave actress. Rainer Werner Fassbinder. She was in a lot of his movies. The Marriage of Maria Braun, Effie Briest, The Bitter Tears of Bertolt von Kant. Fassbinder is a very interesting figure from German new wave, global film. People know who he is. The fact that she's in this movie is really interesting. We'll talk about her character more specifically because it's really nasty, right? But the fact that she's in this kind of shows the kind of reach they were doing. You have Susan Strasberg in it, Lee Strasberg's daughter, who's in the movie. Susan Strasberg, interesting connection. She's in Gio Pontecorvo's first film, Capo, which is Gio Pontecorvo. People know who that is. He's the director of The Battle of Algiers. It's very interesting. I mean, I keep going. Martin Balsam, Robert Vaughn, Shelley Winters, and there's two other people, Steve James, which I have to talk about it sometime. Steve James was like the black guy in Canon movies. People know him Kung Fu Joe and I'm Gonna Get You Sucker. And then the last one is Robert Forster. Robert Forster is in this film as, you know, the villain, the villain, the Lebanese villain. And it's interesting. Like I said, I did not remember that.
Joey Bishop.
Huh?
Joey Bishop.
Huh? Oh,
Joey
yes.
Bishop.
Joey Bishop. Yes. Oh, my bad. I forgot one. And Kim Delaney as well. Another one that's another one I forgot as well. And, you know, Forrester in this film is interesting because he was in Medium Cool in the late 60s, which is kind of, it seemed like a radical film. He has this rep of being part of kind of counterculture movies. But, you know, people like to erase some of these things that they do. And if you hear Robert Forster talk about the movie, he don't regret it. He called them two of the best people he ever worked with. So, you know, you have to kind of situate it. You start thinking about materially how this movie was made, the people involved. You know, it's really interesting. Jay, I see you unmuted. Go ahead.
No, I didn't mean to cut you off. Are you still going? Like, do you have more?
No, I'm good here. I mean, I do want to get into Chuck Norris at some point. We could do it later. We could get into it. I mean, because the other thing with it is just that Chuck, I think what people don't take into account is that I think people acknowledge that Chuck Norris is a right winger now, but he's always been, like, since day one. I mean, Chuck Norris's career has been about right-wing politics. I mean, when the movie came out, I mean, these are some of his quotes. He was a huge Reagan supporter, right? I mean, what was that? It was a quote that he said. He said, I am a conservative, a real flag waver, a big Ronald Reagan fan. I go for the man himself. Ronald Reagan says what he thinks. He's not afraid to speak his mind, even if it may be unpopular. I want a strong leader. He is a strong leader. This is some of his quotes about why he did Delta Force. We were facing here is the fact that our passive approach to terrorism is going to instigate much more terrorism throughout the world. He called the United States a paper tiger. I mean, he felt this film was an important thing to be a part of in, you know, galvanizing the kind of energy of Americans to like get behind militarism across the globe, because terrorism was this like really specific thing that's like going to destroy the entire planet. And he was a big proponent of this movie and these movies completely, and always has been. So this is not like, you know, if people see Chuck Norris write some real weird rant in support of Netanyahu right now, or you know, in support of Trump or any other kind of conservative movement, this is what he's always been. This is not like something that he kind of like turned into. That I've heard some people say, oh, Chuck Norris, man, is he crazy how bad he's become? I'm like, no. He was always there. I mean, he was a cop. He was a military cop. That's how he kind of got his life start, right? He was a military cop in South Korea. So we can go from there. But Jay, jump on in.
Well, I did some history stuff on the actual Delta Force. I don't know if you want me to go there first, or Lara and Stephen, if you have anything else you wanted to add in on Canon. I know you watched the documentary as well and that stuff. So, or the kind of cast and makeup of the film. Obviously, one other point that I would just note is that Menachem Golan, who is one of the partners who runs Canon as a studio, he personally directs this film in Israel, right? So that's also another important thing just to say. But yeah, go ahead if you all have any.
Yeah, I'm so glad you all sent us that documentary, because we watched the movie first and then the documentary, and it made so much sense. You can tell it's Palestine. That watching the film, there are scenes where you're like, that's Palestine. They look like settlements, obviously. I have a lot more thoughts about how they represent Beirut, and we can get into that, about again, the sort of imperial fantasy of the center city, but it's like a fucking desert. So we can get into that. But what's fascinating about this documentary is that it really showed in real time the way that really bad people are rehabilitated, right? Because I loved the documentary throughout it, because they were just trashing fucking Canon films. And they were like, I have this one quote, they're like, if you come to see our films, you have to suffer through them. People were not, sugarcoating this shit. They were like, it's shit, it's blah, blah, blah. It was clear, the entire thing was a Ponzi scheme from the beginning. I'm like, this is a fucking Ponzi scheme. From the beginning, you can see this. And then you have this weird, they're abusive, they're sociopathic, they're fuckers, they're grandiose, there's no rules for them. They're just like the Zionist entity. You do everything how you want it, you follow no rules. And then you have these people commenting on it, right, throughout the film. So I'm being like, cool, they're commenting they're giving us the real shit about how bad it was. And then you have this weird the last 5 minutes where everybody's just rehabilitating the bad guys. And I was just thinking psychologically how important tracking that is, because that's exactly what we see. Liberals do this shit all the time. They're far more ready to rehabilitate fascists and sociopaths than they are militants. Of course, we see this in the film, but they don't even, of all the films, they trash every single fucking film. They don't criticize the Delta Force. Mm-hmm. That's the film that nobody, they're just like, cool, it's like a blip on the screen. Yes, it was big, it was awesome, Chuck Norris came in. And I'm waiting to be like, can you talk about how shitty the acting is? Can we talk about how over the top? Nothing, which tells us a lot. And then they end with this Menachem, everybody's talking about how horrible a person is. And then somebody says, you can't hate someone who leads with their heart. That's one of the quotes in the last 5 minutes, And so it's really just remarkable. And to watch it as a Zionist op, right? That this is about Hasbara, like you said, but also Zionist op, where you're listening to all the ways that they fucked with the industry, they fucked people over, they abused people, and then that's treated in the last 5 minutes as a victory of their brilliance. It's just like the military victories of the Zionist entity. If you are not willing to follow any rules and fuck as many people as you want and kill people along the way, this is to me what you were saying about the women who were just like, I got fucked over by this. They said this thing and then it was this, and then they abused me, and then they didn't pay the crew, and then they didn't do all of that shit. And we're still in this place where people are like, oh, they're just so brilliant. This was brilliant. And they led with their heart. And he was really just loved films. It's so important for us to see how this shit works. That's why we end up with Charlie Kirk being memorialized, right? Because, or who's the recent motherfucker who died? That we're all happy about? Cheney.
Who?
Right?
Who
Dick
was
Cheney?
it?
Dick Cheney.
Oh, Cheney. Yeah.
This
Okay.
is how we see that. We see these war criminals transform in front of our eyes into people we need to memorialize. I mean, that for me was like, I was watching it. That's what I was thinking about. I'm like, okay, that happens in real time. And then you just need to rehabilitate people, even though you've just spent 2 hours trashing them. Did you want to say something about the documentary?
I mean, the documentary, I mean, there's a lot to say about it. And again, I also want to thank you for sending it to us. It was, I mean, it represents the documentary itself, as Lara was saying, actually represents precisely the US's take on the Zionist entity, right? It's a fake state that does horrible, horrible things, but somehow they just keep plowing through and doing the horrible things and kind of works, right? That genocidal strategy kind of works. It's horrible and distasteful to everybody, but you know what?
But they sure are cute doing it.
They really work hard. They have hard work ethic, you know? And it's like, no, it's bad. They're bad.
Mhm.
They're and there's nothing really good about. I mean, there's nothing good about it. It's not even like those documentaries about these sort of grandiose people who think they're making the really, really, really genius, you know, next, you know, Lawrence of Arabia or some sort of racist film. But have these, and they really, but it ends up being this complete farce. No, they're not. It's just really a predatory. It's a predatory enterprise. And like I said, I just can't help it actually being the documentary actually really being incredibly American. Also peppered with its own flavors of anti-Semitism, but also all the badness too, like the United States take on Israel. All the badness is because they kind of just don't get the American market.
That's the thing.
Right.
Making American films for American audiences was not their forte. That was, I memorized the fucking thing. I was like, what?
Yeah, and there was when I was in grad school, there was a professor just political science at the university. He actually was the advisor to former advisor to Ronald Reagan, a black man, unfortunately. And he said, you know, his lovely quote, his lovely little idiom he always or story he always tells is, you know, I was with the president and he asked me, you know, so and so, I'm not going to say his name, why do I need to support Israel? And he said, you know, Mr. President, democracy is like sex. Good sex is good and bad sex is good. And you know, Israel is kind of like that. And so that's how this is, right? It's like this whole thing about it's just really bad movies. So these Americans are saying like, yeah, they make these sort of bad movies, but they're still like kicking it out. And what I really feel is important is that they disavow the actual Americanness of the movies, right? It's so crass. What these foreigners are doing is coming in and taking the very racist nomenclature that is the bare bones of United States culture, political culture, right? And they're translating it onto the screen without any filters. So this is the whole other thing. So, you know, they weren't politically correct. No, they were racist. That's the one other way of saying they're racist. And they were okay with that. And that racism was not only an Israeli racism against Arabs, but it was an American racism and sexism, the way that, I mean, complete exploitation film of women. You know, of course, all their stuff was, you know, about that one guy who says like, oh, it was like white middle-class men shooting, you know, people of color, of poorer classes or some sort of that. Was like, that was the big race analysis of the film.
DEI
right?
analysis.
So this is kind of like I think the documentary itself was precisely an American way to dissociate with the very fundamental bones of the United States. Yeah, and I think, you know, I just want to also say a few other things, which is, you know, remember with Chuck Norris, he's speaking all that smack in the 80s, where the United States still has this, and this is what this series is about, has this sort of complex about being the loser in Vietnam. You know, so in Stripes, they're like, we're 5-0 in a tie. You know, like Vietnam was a tie somehow, right? You know, like no, like they're still grappling with that the United States is the bad guy, was lost, you know, and what Chuck Norris is doing is giving everyone permission to, like the Stallone films, giving everyone permission to revel in the privilege of killing brown people as a moral code, right? So I think that's super important. And then the last thing I want to say, there's a whole thing, and to me, I have things to say about Lee Marvin as well. We can talk about that later. But what the thing is these are so horrible films, such terrible films. But like Death Wish, not Death Wish.
Missing in Action.
No, Death Wish. Death Wish is horrible, but it also sets the nomenclature for, Dirty Harry, which becomes a reputable film, right? So this every film that we see now is just operating on this same sort of nomenclature that these folks are codifying at this time, and they knew that was the ticket for them. It was a winning ticket.
Yeah. Appreciate it. I think there's a way in which we could think about Netflix and Paramount Plus and like all of these things now as the canon of today, right? Like, it's just that they figured out how to soften some of the edges, and do, but it's, the same thing. These relatively cheaply made films under pretty crappy conditions within the industry that are going straight to viewers and so on.
To that point, something I forgot to mention is that there has been this rewriting of exploitation films as this kind of like positive way to get around Hollywood being too rigid. So there's a valorization of not paying your employees good wages, being a little rough, when a woman says, I want to be covered and I'm naked, and you just basically say, we can't do that. We got to get the shot. Right? This kind of idea that it's the get things done. And look, we got to bring in Weinstein here, because you literally had Weinstein being praised for these types of things at like the Golden Globes. I remember there was like Harvey, I think Meryl Streep said it, Harvey gets things done. Right? And then a few years later after that, we're finding out, well, many people already knew this, the public is finding out about his criminal activity, but his criminal activity as a boss was well known and it was valorized. But I think Canon has a specific role in helping valorizing that. And Stephen, what you said is true. There's this way that they want to say, well, this was just some kind of foreigners, it's a very jolly foreigner thing, and it got insulting after a while. Like, get the fuck out of here! Just stop this, because remember, Golan specifically said this is an American thing. And I do think he's fundamentally correct. I'm giving this kind of American idea, and he wants to resurrect the kind of the American spirit, because he wants Americans to kind of buy into what they want as a project militarily. He's like, you people, you need to kind of be with us. Right. And you're seeing him basically like he wants to like keep the imperial marriage together, and he's really going for it. But like, there's a way, and I know this as an actor who started acting in the 90s in New York, that what Canon did became part of the independent model completely. And then also their films, because of the people who grew up watching them, when you get to like the aughts and the 2010s, these types of movies are kind of implanted in our historical memory. So you get all of these, what are these things like Black Hawk Down, all this type of stuff that begin coming out. It's coming from, it's coming from those people, and all those audiences are developed then, because there is, and I'll say this, and we can move, like, we can't sleep on the uptick of violence from the 70s movies to the 80s. The uptick is like, the qualitative shift is intense. Like, it's intense, right? You had violence, but like the amount of they had a movie where they said they blew up like 5 buildings in a city block.
Yeah, they like bought a whole city block and blew it up, right?
Just to blow it up. Just to blow it up. This is what they did. And this is what they made like a regular part of production on, like, even on small scales. So you can't, you can't, like let that part go. It is built into the framework after them. And look, and then I think, Jay, you pointed out who produced the documentary. Brett Ratner. So we could just go from there.
Yeah. Yeah, for folks who don't know, Brett Ratner has the sexual assault allegations that get connected to Russell Simmons, which we talked about recently in the Run DMC thing. So, because they'd worked on Rush Hour together. But, and also at the end of this documentary, they do positively reference, because the Weinstein allegations hadn't happened yet, that without, canon, that Weinstein never happens, basically, is what they say, and so, and they didn't mean that in a bad way. They meant it in quite a celebratory way, actually. All right, so I just want to take a couple minutes. I have a little bit that I've kind of written out about Delta, the actual Delta Force, because I think this is actually important historical context in 1986, and also just stuff that people may not really know. A lot of this comes from Seth Harp's book, The Fort Bragg Cartel, which I know there's like some criticisms of it as well, but there's also some really good stuff in there, and it's an interesting read for sure for people. So he has a really good chapter specifically about special forces and like the kind of rise of special forces, and so there's this guy, Colonel Charles Beckwith. He's one of the figures who's kind of credited with the rise of Delta Force. He was an exchange officer with the British SAS in Malaysia, where British were waging a really savage counterinsurgency campaign against communist and anti-colonial forces. Malaysia, we've kind of talked about in past conversations, particularly when we talk about like the origins of counterinsurgency literature in kind of this modern field around it. Obviously, it has a longer history through things like pacification and just counter-revolutionary war and colonial war. But Orasami Burton and Dylan Rodriguez and others, they talk about the importance of Malaysia within the development of this field. So Beckwith, he eventually returns he is a U.S. person, right? So he's with the British SAS on exchange and learns about how they're doing counterinsurgency in Malaysia, basically. He comes back on the eve of the Tet Offensive and, becomes a part of the leadership of a prototypical unit that had already started actually a few years earlier that was called Project Delta. And there's some fairly innocuous sounding activities that Project Delta is a part of, but probably most notable are rescuing prisoners of war, hunter-killer operations, planning a lot of mines and booby traps, training South Vietnamese special operations, and intelligence gathering and psychological operations. At the same time, during Vietnam, you had the Phoenix Project or program, or, it has different names. Operation Phoenix. We talked about that a bit. It was directly referenced actually in Lethal Weapon, which we did an episode on, because Riggs, played by Gibson, is supposed to be a veteran from Phoenix. So a lot of this stuff starts to come to light in the 70s through reporting by folks like Seymour Hersh and others, also through the there's group of activists that steal a bunch of documents from the FBI and media PA. There's kind of a lot of things going on at once. And as a result, the government, basically starts a series of kind of working groups and committees and things like this. So the Vietnam War Crimes Working Group was a Pentagon, right? And so important to say with all of these are like largely PR maneuvers, right? This is like, internal. We all know about internal investigations, right? From police brutality and everything else. Like if the people that are, same thing with like during the Biden administration, they would frankly say, well, the Israelis can investigate to see if they're committing war crimes. Like we'll see what they say about it. It's that kind of thing, right? But you had one in the Pentagon. And it was one of the many impetuses for the Church Committee hearings in 1975, which become a pretty big deal, because the Phoenix program comes under, and I should say, the Phoenix program was directly under CIA leadership, right? And so this is part of why it becomes scrutinized. And it's also scrutinized because it's happening at the same time that things like Operation Chaos become revealed, which and MK Ultra. MK Ultra gets revealed because of the death of Frank Olson. So they kill their own CIA agent by drugging him and throwing him out of a window, which is in the Netflix documentary Wormwood. Well, documentary is a loose word, but there's a series there. And Chaos is the program through which they monitor members of the Black Panthers, the SDS, weather, etc. Right. And so this becomes kind of contentious in the 70s because the CIA technically is not supposed to be surveilling and gathering intelligence upon US citizens, which, of course, again, a lot of this I think is kind of farcical to us at this point in history, but it was nonetheless something that, you know, the public was very worried about. And we see it a lot in the 70s and even some of the 80s films that we've talked about of this kind of concern that even comes into Hollywood about this sort of, you know, over surveillance, deep state, overstepping of the CIA in particular. There's the Rockefeller Commission as well, which is definitely a limited hangout. It's run by Nelson Rockefeller, who, you know, he's absolutely a CIA insider. His brother and he both had close relationships with the Dulles brothers, Allen and John Foster. Allen is the first director of the CIA. And yeah, so anyways, those committees, nonetheless, even though they are kind of like a you know, an ass covering kind of operation, they do publicly release some of these programs and say, yeah, we were doing this, but we're going to shut it down. Or they do something else, which is say we're going to put things under congressional oversight, right? And so this is really the piece where you get into Delta Force and special forces more broadly, which is that there's at least a veneer or a theater around CIA operations having to share information with members of Congress. It's usually small committees, right? Like, and again, I don't think that this is, you know, super significant, nor am I saying that I actually believe that the CIA is telling Congress everything that it's doing and that there aren't, you know, black ops that go off all the time. But I think in understanding the limits of these kinds of reforms, it's important to say what happens also at the same time, which is that in 76, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence is formed. In 77, the House of Representatives forms its own committee. Within 4 months, Delta Force is officially launched. And the Intelligence Oversight Committee, which mandates that the CIA report to a group of 8 Republican and Democratic legislators and passed in 1980. 6 months later, JSOC comes into existence. And so part of what TARP talks about, which you actually see in this film, is that what they did with the special forces community is they created a very truncated, short chain of command where you could get from a general who's basically on the ground, which is Lee Marvin in this film, who is able to basically get a line right into the White House, which they show, so that then the president, you know, maybe there's a Secretary of State or like a Joint Chiefs of Staff person, and then the general is actually directly overseeing the boots on the ground, right? And so then you create this limited chain of command, and importantly, the military is not under congressional oversight in the same way. So they don't actually have to get approval or share what they're doing and so on and so forth. And like part of what Seth Harp shows is that, you know, initially this was a smaller group of forces, but it grows to be very large. Now, last thing I'll say that is in the context of the 80s, this stuff was still totally a failure, right? So the TWA flight 847 that this film is partly based off, they completely rewrite the history. It actually is not at all successful on the US side. And the Lebanese resistance folks who take the plane managed to negotiate the release of over 700 Lebanese political prisoners through this operation, right? And so there is no the scene that we see at the end where Chuck Norris goes in and blows everybody up and frees all the hostages and all, like none of that shit ever happened. And the other thing about it is that not long prior to this is the failure of the US to resolve the so-called Iran hostage crisis, which I know we will reference as well in this discussion, right? And that actually a bunch of Delta Force people actually died in that attempt, which actually the film does show. That's supposed to be, I mean, they don't show it well, but that's what's supposed to be happening in the opening scene, is this failure of, you know, getting the hostages out of Iran, right? And this is what causes Chuck Norris to quit, basically, and say that, you know, the White House won't let us win, essentially, or whatever. So that's all I wanted to do in terms of setup, but I think it's important for people to understand just that kind of point, is that the emergence of these special forces comes in part due to scrutiny. And, you know, I think actually it's illustrative to say, like, okay, you put one thing under some kind of reporting and whatnot, and they'll just create another entity right away and that does more or less the same thing, and probably at this, you know, so it's partly to show that those kind of reforms at that level are relatively meaningless, actually, in my analysis. But yeah, so is there anything, Lara and Stephen, that you would want to say on that, or anything even just in terms of the history of this period and stuff going on that you think is really important to this film?
Wow.
Nothing. There was nothing going on. It was just
Hummus eating Arabs.
tabbouleh, fattoush, hummus. That's it.
They stop doing the ducky sometimes. Do you wanna?
No, you go.
I mean, so thank you
All
so
you.
much for that. Thank you so much for the, you know, the background about. And I actually, I know it seems like the author is a bit of a liberal at times, but I actually liked reading Fort Bragg cartel stuff because I think it was really great. And he's a okay, whatever, liberal, but he's got that stuff out there. It was really interesting and shows that it, like, you know, it's a criminal operation. I think, you know, I don't know if he says this, and he doesn't say this, which is, you know, the United States military apparatus is a criminal operation, right? The United States is a criminal operation, and that's. So in 1990, I think if you think about what's happening in the 80s, I mean, there's a few things I want to say. One, which is about the historical accuracy, and I don't know if I should say it now or later, but basically, George Shultz wanted to deploy Delta Force. Delta Force was actually at the time assembling its team in Italy when the plane was in Algeria. But they fuck up. I mean, even in the movie, they fuck up, right? Because they think Arabs are dumb. How many terrorists are in the plane, George? I don't know, just two. How do you know? It's a hunch. Okay, Lee. You know, like fucking, I mean, even their own shit shows you how fucking arrogant they are, right? That the dumb Arabs weren't like smart enough to throw 17 more freaking militants onto the plane, right? So they didn't have that intel. And they were watching CNN at this time for intel. And they were putting together a force to raid the plane in Algeria. And the people on the ground, the American negotiators on the ground, were saying, like, don't. Number one, you're going to piss the Algerians off, who are being cooperative. They're not going to let you hear. And the plane's going to get blown up. And by this time, by the way, Lebanese are also listening to CNN, right? So they know all this is happening. So there's this whole this thing about this, you know, what you're telling us, is they created this like illegal force, but they're fuck ups, right? They're fuck ups, and actually this actually piece in many ways is actually taught as a successful piece of hostage negotiation, and we can get into that later on. So that's number one. In terms of Lebanon, I just want to I don't know if I should, like, you know, regress into my nerdy, you know, Middle Eastern professor mode, which is like, so 19, this is made around 1985. Why is 1985 anything special? Is because Lebanon has now been under in quote unquote civil war for 10 years against forces of imperialism on one side and progressive pro-Palestinian forces on the other. What happened is 1982, because the Palestinian resistance has been Palestinian resistance, which includes the Lebanese resistance, by the way, has been so successful in irritating and knocking off and dysregulating an Israeli military assets inside the state now known as Israel and elsewhere. The Israelis basically invade Lebanon in 1982. This is a big thing because it's the first time that Israel sieges an Arab capital. Before it's like their thing. They love and I mean, that's what their brand is, stealing Arab land. That's their brand. But it's the first time they went to a capital outside of Jerusalem, and sieged it. So it was a big deal. They say between 25 and 30,000 Palestinian and Lebanese were killed in 1982 by the Israelis. Beirut was being suffocated. It was a big deal. The Palestinians were able to kind of hold Beirut and negotiate their withdrawal to Tunisia, and it became a very successful sort of celebratory thing. So even in this victory, the Israelis actually kind of lost, right? The Lebanese government at this time in 1982, there was an election, and it was a stalemate kind of because they couldn't assemble all the parliamentarians. The right wing candidate was basically forced into not forced, like he wasn't forced. He forced himself into the presidency. Several months later, he was assassinated by the Lebanese resistance. The Lebanese rightist parties, the fascist parties, in collusion with the Israelis, went then and massacred 2,000 or so Palestinians in the camps in Sabra Shatila. Okay, this is the background, right? So after the Lebanese resistance continues from 82, this is what people forget. The state now known as Israel, the Israeli occupation forces are occupying Lebanon, which they have occupied since 1978. Okay, so this is not like some sort of gray zone of whether there is a Palestinian state or not. They have now occupied 1978. We're illegally occupying, a signatory to the UN. In fact, the Lebanese delegate actually was one of the authoring of the UN charters, right? So this is like clear violation of sovereignty. They were there, but after 82, they were still occupying all the way up to Beirut. Okay, Lebanese resistance kept picking them off, ended up blowing up the Israeli headquarters in Sur, in Tyre, in something like 83, 84, and that occupation became untenable. So they retreated down to this line, this Litani line, which is they're trying to make again, which became for the next another 15 years what they call the security belt, right? So this is the time that this is happening, right? This is the time that Israel has just withdrawn because of the success of the Lebanese and Palestinian resistance. Okay, so we tend to forget this because we're thinking that the Lebanese are always fighting themselves, which they are at one level, but on the other hand, the Lebanese resistance at this moment is successfully picking off Israelis and making it really uncomfortable for them. So this is made in 1985, right? Or 1986, right on the cusp. So this is what's happening in Lebanon. Beirut then kind of becomes controlled by Amal, the Shia and the Syrian, with the aegis of the Syrians.
Which are the flags we see.
Which are some of the flags that we see.
And the Arabic writing on the tank right when they land
a lot of
Beirut.
Pictures. I mean, there's a lot of mishmash going on here because Amal is the sectarian party for the Shia. It was started by Musa Sadr, but it's not a religious party; it's a sectarian party.
Which is the poster we see everywhere. That's Musa Sadr.
Right, and there's a lot of Khomeinis in there too, because at the same time, the Islamic resistance is becoming born, and the Islamic resistance isn't fully Hezbollah yet. Okay. So what we have is something called Islamic Jihad, but that's the Lebanese version, not the Palestinian version. So there are these sort of shadowy groups. But we learn actually later on that it's actually these basically Hezbollah members who are in these things. So Hezbollah as a party is coalescing. What's really interesting, you talked about the founding of the Delta Force. that the main players in the Lebanese resistance, in Hezbollah's resistance, in these military actions are actually come out of the PLO's Quwet Sabatash, the 417. So it's the Palestinian Delta Force people who were Lebanese, who ended up, who were mostly Shia, because the Communist Party and the leftists were the grassroots were Shia because they're the most dispossessed. Okay, before and in the 70s, the Communist Party and the leftist parties were, the grassroots were Shia. So these Shia militants were part of the PLO. They came out and slowly became founding members of the Hezbollah. Right? Ahmed Mughniya, who was killed in 2008, is this legendary character. He's the head of the intelligence of Hezbollah intelligence. Mustafa Ali Hamadi, one of the militants on the plane, that he was killed in the film, but not, is actually also comes out, and I think Ali Izzuddin, I think the other guy too, but definitely Mustafa Ali, come out of 417 of the PLO. Right? And so you can see at this moment, this is the time that Hezbollah starts to coalesce as a political formation and as a military force. And in 1985, they actually make their manifesto. They say their manifesto, which is رسالة مفتوحة إلى المحرومين ومحرومين العالم, the open letter to the dispossessed of Lebanon and the world. And it states the goals of Hezbollah. Which the goals of Hezbollah actually is an Islamist organization at that time, and they haven't gone through other transformations. So they are the Islamist, very, very Islamist organization at that time. But this is which their stated goal is, and Palestinian resistance and Palestinian liberation is one of the top 3 or 4 goals of Hezbollah even then. And you can see why. It's because these Lebanese fighters, these Lebanese militants, were actually integral in the Palestinian liberation movement in Lebanon at the time. So I don't know if that's too much. There's obviously a lot of other little nerdy things I can talk about, but that's 1985.
No, I just want to say, no, I think that's really important, because this is kind of tracking back to when I was a kid. Because when I watched this movie, I remember my father even parroting some of these things within this film, saying, they just don't really know how to get it together in those countries. Right? And what these films transplant in the consciousness of people. So for a long time, it wasn't until I met people such as yourselves, when I became more political, that I began to get an understanding of this. But when you watch these films, there's a way that cinematically they just feels locked in a complete turn of just absolute apocalypse. And then there'll be there's this line. What is it when they say that was it? Beirut was the Vegas of the Middle East, which I was just like, "What? Wait a minute!"
That's
right?
Joey Bishop.
Joey Bishop. I was just like, "What?" I sputtered, right? But I remember my dad saying, he said, "Yeah, I heard it was once a really beautiful place, and then it just got messed up." And so without this kind of historical analysis, you think of people, when they think of these places, it just becomes this everlasting apocalypse, except it had this beautiful time at some point.
Of course, before Palestinian resistance, right? And I think this is
before they start.
I mean, that very famous Ghassan Kanafani interview that we all love, the intro into it by Carlton is all about this dazzling place before gun-toting guerrillas and the business of revolution started, and he actually says where meek businessmen used to walk these halls, and now it's the PFLP that owns this 3-story building that has amenities like Sydney, right? I mean, that's where we're at in this, and we're always primed to see, and this, of course, you see this in the discourse of Lebanese, that it's Palestinians that are intruders, right? It's not the imperialists. It's not these fuckers who show up and like, there's no person around to see these people come into through the water onto the beaches of Lebanon. Not one Lebanese person is present to see this. Suddenly, all the natives just disappear and it's theirs, right? I have a lot more to say about that later, but it primes us, like you're saying, to see it's Palestinians that are intruders. If it were not for Palestinian resistance, Lebanon would be this beautiful place, right? The Paris of the Middle East, the Geneva of every fucking version we've heard it, right? And there's no and it's a deliberate attempt to displace imperialism. It's a deliberate attempt to displace the racism that is always how the global South is talked about all the time. It's always our leaders that are corrupt and can't get their shit together. It's not the fact that you purposefully underdevelop and asphyxiate places, particularly places that refuse the partition, right? When Stephen's saying that part of the Palestinian resistance were Lebanese people who were involved in that. I mean, growing up, even as I think one of the things that I'm so angered about in terms of my own upbringing in Lebanon and what I had to undo through political education and through political action was how our Lebanese heroes are disappeared out of this history. It is a political project so that things like Delta Force land and have traction in a particular way, right? It's these Palestinians. I just want to say something really quickly. One of the things that pissed me off the most about this fucking film, and then watching the documentary helped me see what it is those damn fucking kufiyas. That they're not real kufiyas. They're cheap as fuck. They're like, I'm just like, you can't even bring it together, right? And that's the thing. It's they're Palestinian made. They're all these sorts of things. You see it. I'm just like, this is a centerpiece of the construction of the terrorist in your fucking mind. And you can't even do that correctly because you don't give a fuck. And that's what I mean is like this half-ass. Racism is also half-ass, and you don't actually have to do very much because, like you were saying to me, is like these things already exist in the infrastructure of consciousness and the unconscious, where somebody clocking that is like, oh, I know what that is, and I know what that represents, right? And now we're at a whole other, stratosphere of quote unquote knowing what the kufi represents. But I just want to go on record being like, those things are not fucking kufis. They're not.
But
Awesome.
I want to say something to the politics of that Mumia was saying of chaos or they're always killing one another. They're primitive primal selves. But before that, the question also is, as you were talking, I realized to me, it's like those kufiyas are as realistic as the motorcycle with the magical missiles coming out of it, like freaking G.I. Joe
coming out of its ass,
right? So like. I mean, you have to. This is the whole thing's magical realism. But just to say that what's really important about the way you were saying, Mumia, is like how the United States sees Africa, where they can't get their shit together.
Right.
It completely removes the fact that every war in Lebanon, every war in the Middle East, and every war in in Africa is a proxy war. It's a proxy war. And here we see this figure of Greek Orthodox priest, the good Greek, well, he kind of pseudo-Arab, non-Arab Christian, right? Who sides with the Americans, right? When actually there were very famous, the Greek Orthodox patriarch of Palestine actually was arrested. Gosh, and I forgot his name. I think it's not his name. I forgot his name, but he actually was arrested for gun running. So what they want to show is Christians good. Those other kind of like Muslimy, but not. I mean, you don't really see super Islami things here, right?
No, but you hear them
it still
speaking.
hasn't coalesced, like I said, into a purely. I know they, of course, you and all that sort of,
No. About the Greek, the Greek priest, you see that you see them in their broken fucking Arabic and sometimes gibberish Arabic. By the way, it's just all made up fucking words, saying, "Oh, good, another Christian died."
Yeah, they really don't have, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, so you have like good Christian Arabs there's like that guy stand in for the good Lebanese who are there, who are Israeli assets and allies, who will massacre Palestinians for you, who will work in the South for you. And then you have all these other sort of swarthy guys who are lazy and sleeping and whatever. But that's the thing. I mean, this idea that the United States has, or the West has, as people like, they just won't just get your shit together. I remember in the 80s living this. It's like, oh, just get your shit together and call us when you get your shit together. Like, get the fuck out of our fucking country. Why don't you fucking let the freaking revolution that happened in 1975 and 76 succeed, and Lebanon would have been a freaking socialist state and wouldn't have had all the infighting. Right? You're the ones who created these, just like they're doing now, just like Tom Barak is arming Lebanese militias, Christian Lebanese militias, in hopes of creating a civil war. And that's the thing. Hezbollah knows that if they ever start shooting back, that they actually also might have to watch their rear flank. Mm-hmm. Because the Americans for the past 2 or 3 years have been flying guns into Lebanon through another airport in the north, and giving them to the Lebanese forces and other militias, right? Yeah. This is what the United States does. So all this chaos and why can't they get it together? And it's a failed state. It's precisely because American and European machinations, and by the way, Soviet machinations were also lovely in there too.
Awesome, thank you. So let's move into the movie. So first couple of big developments we see in the movie are obviously this scene in Tehran where things are falling apart, right? And they're trying to evacuate, and and Chuck Norris is running in like Lassie to save little Jimmy from the well or whatever, and then you have really the big, and actually like there's actually so little substance to this film, like in terms of scenes that actually have, can even be read beyond like just dumb action crap, like but obviously the hijacking of the airplane and the kind of drama around that, those are like big early scenes in the movie and make up probably the first third to 40% of the film probably, and I would say about 90% of it that's should be analyzed and critiqued and all of that, although obviously the last half there's plenty to talk about as well, but it's just a lot of it is this kind of I mean, the term pornographic that you use, Stephen, is so on point, and I think it connects to like when you watch that Canon movies documentary. I mean, they use words like exploitation to kind of give this genre of cinema that they were doing like somehow some kind of differentiation from straight up pornography, but that's really what it was. I mean, these guys got their start both in their, that's another thing we should say, is that they were in Israel. They were sweethearts of Israel's cinema for a number of years, basically, before they buy up Canon and start working into US and UK markets and all of this. But that's what they come in initially doing, is basically these like, it's kind of like teen college porn, like kind of stuff. And it definitely, although this movie is not one like most of theirs, where there are a bunch of women running around naked, apparently, it still manages to kind of have that sort of quality to it in certain ways, in terms of I guess that in this sense exploitation is correct, right, in terms of exploiting these kind of narratives and the racism and everything else. But yeah, I mean, early impressions from early scenes in the film.
Yeah, I mean, there is that grenade, right, scene that's like about blowing the guy,
yeah.
right? Mm. So it's just it's fascinating in terms of like, oh wow, you really managed to get that in there. Okay, this is completely out of it. But first scenes, I mean, of course, Chuck Norris is on the scene already. He's primed to be the hero of all heroes. It's the little guys against the big guys in government, all that sort of shit. But I love how right away we meet all of these actors, and certainly the Israelis, as settlers, right? Because I learned this from a documentary. So it was in Palestine, and it was like, they were like, it was 100 degrees there. And so all that sweat was real, because fucking settlers and white people don't belong in that weather. And they're just like fucking melting down. Now, of course, the first scene you see is it's the quote unquote terrorists that are super, everybody's happy and go lucky in airports. Yeah, right. Like anybody in airports is happy, except for these terrorists who can't even do that correctly, right? Like they show up and they're right away guilty and falling apart. And the guy who doesn't get on the plane has like a fucking meltdown. They can't even do that. They can't even do their quote unquote mission correctly. But something that I really, you're immediately taken to Jewish people in the airport, right? So the foreshadowing is so heavy-handed and so over the top and so fucking racist that immediately positions Palestinians and Arabs as, you know, preemptively anti-Semitic right away, and primes, of course, the audience to be like, uh-oh, there's something here that's happening. This is around Jewishness. But one of the lines that's amazing, you see the older Jewish women talking to each other in like the duty-free area, and she shows her the ring that has Hebrew on it, right? And she says, again, the foreshadowing, I'm just like, this is so sloppy and heavy-handed, but she says, I got this on my honeymoon, right? My husband gave it to me on my honeymoon. And the woman goes, you're Jewish? And she responds, she's like, no, I'm Chinese. Of course I'm Jewish, which to me is amazing because Jewishness immediately becomes a nationality. Like even the racism of I mean, that's a racist fucking thing to say, but it becomes a nationality. You're immediately, Chinese becomes like the parallel to Judaism. And this is how I'm taking this in, being like, this is the construction of this, the inextricability of Jewishness from the Zionist entity, which of course we later see when they go there, right? You know, you've done this before, boys, going into Beirut, now it's our turn, right? That sort of, I mean, the most offensive shit. And to your point, and Tume, I believe you said this, that the connection of these two empires, right? The inextricability of the Zionist fight, settler colonial fight, from the settler colonial fight of this settler colony in the United States. But that's my immediate thing. I was like, wow, this is the setup right away, right? The collapse of ethnicity and sort of nationality. And then the other thing immediately is that they're not speaking, in the first scene where they speak Arabic, they're not speaking Arabic. It's gibberish. Later on, they like try a little harder. These settlers suck at it. They might,
Israelis who suck at it.
Later on, there are words that they say Arabic, and it's painful. It's so fucking painful to listen to. But in that first couple exchange, I couldn't make out what that. I think they may have been trying. I don't give a fuck. It was not Arabic that they were doing, but does it really matter? Right? And that's where I was like, I was tongue in cheek about the unibrow, but like all of this, the whole, like the close-ups on their face and the unibrow, and they're dirty and they're swarthy, and but all of that already exists in the popular imagination of who like you don't even need to, these guys don't even need to like pull out their guns. You already know who the quote unquote terrorists are in a field of very happy-go-lucky people that of course then their whole life is, you know, destroyed by these people. But did you want to say anything about the
very opening
airport
scene? I think the very opening scene, as you were saying, Jared, it was just, you know, it sets, I mean, I've got the million things. Number one is, to go back to Natome, you know, the Lee Marvin, it's like the first scene basically in Lee Marvin. What you're being shown is this is the Dirty Dozen, right? This is the Dirty Dozen. This is what it is, right? This is the American Seven Samurai, right? That you have the sort of, you know, gritty, honest but crass kind of, you know, soldiers against that dishonest political brass, right? And they're gonna do what they get. And he and Chuck, like, even, you know, defies Lee Marvin's order to get back here. We gotta leave it out. And it's like, and then, you know, whatever goes. And it also sets up this sort of Patroclus, Achilles relationship between, you know, Chuck and, you know, little Pete. I don't know what his name is, you know. The Lassie reference, right? So it's like it's right. It's like really, really dense with just trying to like locate you immediately where we are. We're in a post-Vietnam moment. They say that the guy, I think he said something about like 5 years. That's about 5 years in Vietnam. 5 years in Vietnam. You sucked up 5 tours, dude. You are a real baby killer, right? I mean, this guy, and it's that, you know, it's that this is going to happen again. What is this debacle? Just so everybody knows, Carter sends in special operations to try to, I think in '79, they tried to save 200 hostages that have been taken and are being held in the American embassy, which was taken after the Iranian Revolution. And they tried to, and Carter is seen as a soft liberal. You know, he put solar panels on the White House, which is the first thing that Ronald Reagan rips out when he gets in, he moves in. And so he's thinking a softie, but what happens is what happens when a sort of softie does a military action, they fuck up, and they fucked up actually because that Delta Force, or whoever that force was, that special operations force, didn't put sand screens on their helicopters. So they failed because they fucked up. And it looks like something else, but like, no, you fucked up, dudes. That was you, right? So this is this big fail. It's a kind of the emasculation, the further emasculation of United States after their emasculating loss in Vietnam. So this movie is showing, like the Rambo movies, like this showing this is not going to happen again, right? So that's all these sort of like codes in the very first scene. I mean, we can go on to there's tons happening also in the airport. By way, the guy who like was all over the place, like all sweaty and like made an argument, and it's unclear if he's making a diversion or not. He actually is a real character who's actually imprisoned by the Greeks afterwards, and is traded for Greek passengers in Algeria. So he's actually released. So that image of when you see them hugging in Beirut, like what the fuck,
how did you just there's so many drop things that just pop back. I mean, you're like, how did this guy get here? Where did it come from? Yeah.
But there's tons happening also, like you said. I'm also I'll tell you, but there's also like homages to like Layla Khalid as well in many ways. The whole thing is homage to all the visual imagery that you're going to be getting from cable news in the 1980s. If you were, if you're watching anything above 12 years old.
Yeah, I'll just add a couple things because so when I watched the opening this time, and it's fun, I think when Jay and I did Forgeries of Memory and Meaning by Cedric Robinson and thinking about what he talked about Griffith, and one of the things that Robinson has said in very well, and some other people like Clyde Taylor have said, is like, when they talk about D.W. Griffith as like a formative filmmaker for American cinema, it's usually around this idea of montage. But their argument, as I'm interpreting it, and I think they would agree, is that he's also, and more importantly, about the logic, the visual logic of how to create villain, right? And villain who is uncultured, inhuman, the kind of visual signifiers that you need to kind of make. Because like, if you look at the infamous Gus Chase scene in Birth of a Nation, he's panting, he's sweating. Does this sound like anything we saw of the representation of the hijackers? The panting, the sweating, this kind of just like absolutely bestiality of human. And I'm just like, this is D.W. Griffith logic. This is like that implanted. And it's funny because they praise, Golan and Globus has praised American film and cinema so much. And you can see how they, for their Imperial project, they knew where to draw from, whether it was subconscious or conscious, whatever, they knew where to draw from. So I'm watching this and I'm just like, this is literally just that D.W. Griffith logic, just now being flipped to the new villain of the moment. And if what Robinson does good is also show that Griffith was a part of imperialism. He wanted to create these imperial narratives for American empire to have a certain kind of image So let's think about this film. What is this for the two empires who are trying to, we are, together in this kind of fight against global terror. And then another film that hit me that comes after this is also where I think Tarantino also thinks about Inglourious Bastards. If you remember that film, what the plot of that film is, it's basically the Jews being able to go out and murder Hitler, right? So this rewriting of history, right? So because remember in the doc, there was the woman who said, well, the Delta Force really is like how it should have went. How it should have went. And I was like, oh, so basically you're getting your fantasy that you were not able to get. And this is this wish fulfillment that American films do. And they provide people who have power, right? I'm not saying that everybody in the audience wants these wish fulfillments. Some of them do. But at the same token, the people who have the power to set narrative. So this is like their perverse wish fulfillment, where they and to think about how disgusting it is. You get to have all this money and all this stuff, and you make this big spectacle to do your perverse wish fulfillment. It just shows how disgusting this whole project is, right? You just look at it and it's just putrid. Like I said, I'm watching it and I'm just like, I'm making these noises. It's just like, oh my God. Like you're just watching the perversions of these people's brains.
One of the things I told Stephen actually, and this makes sense why Menachem had to be the director, right? Is that I was like, he must have been so delighted, like so satisfied, right? Which again, we can think about the sexuality in all of this, about constructing they're not even Palestinian, they're supposed to be Lebanese, but for him it's the same fucking thing, right? About just making the most raw, barbaric, primitive Arab that you could have. And he was just delighting in all of it. I mean, every fucking scene is an opportunity to project and to make, this is, I would say, actually projective identification and inviting in of these quote unquote terrorists to play the fullness of the fantasy of what a terrorist is from everything they say, right? Down to, by the way, they can't even say hijacking. They say hijack. This is a hijack, right? I mean, just the most basic shit that you pick up on that is how they see Arabs. That is what populates their genocidal world. This is the centerpiece of Zionism as an eliminatory logic, is one that is, and you mentioned bestiality. Of course, I'm thinking about Fanon's work on that, about how the colonized has to have that sort of image in the mind of the colonizer. But I could just imagine he must have reveled in this fucking shit. He was like, this is what I did this for.
And he wasn't the original director. He did fire the director. I don't have the exact things, but I know he was not supposed to do it. So probably was just him, was like, this is
couldn't do it well enough. Yeah. The non-Israeli couldn't do it well enough.
So many. I just want to say something to build on this. One, you're absolutely right. There's a magical undoing.
Yeah.
But the magical undoing is not just, this is how it should have gone. It's not just, the United States should have won the Vietnam War. It's not just all that, which it is. But let's really, and Jared, you said this earlier, and I'm going to put it in now because I think it's very important. This was for the Lebanese resistance, for Hezbollah, and actually a successful event. And again, they played it out very well, and the negotiators did as well. Why? Because the demand was, as you said, Jared, is to release more than 700 Lebanese prisoners, not Lebanese prisoners held by Lebanon, by the Zionists in Lebanon, who were illegally taken and detained and imprisoned without trial in Atlit prison inside the state now known as Israel. This is actually against UN conventions. You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to remove prisoners of war or whomever or combatants from their place into other places like the United States to Guantanamo. That's illegal. This is in fact the reason why the United States, who brokered the deal, don't see this as a hostage exchange. because they say kind of that the Israelis shouldn't have done it anyway, so it doesn't really count, right? So the magical undoing, Menachem Golan, I know the fantasy is that, the Palestinians took the hostages, and that's bad, but that's not what the Israelis have been doing forever. Right. And if you read Leila Khalid's autobiography, and if you listen to the PFLP's discourse at this time, the point of the matter is they are being held to a level of international law which Israelis are not. That's it.
So this day,
no one likes hijacking. Not a fun thing. No one loves to get hijacked. No one's saying that's the greatest thing, and no one's even saying that's not breaking international law. But the point of the matter is that more than 700,000 Lebanese inside Israel, inside that prison,
700.
700 and something, inside who are taken out. That was not a breach of international law, nor is the occupation of southern Lebanon by the Zionist entity,
right.
which also was contravening not only convention but actually UN Security Council resolutions at that time. Right. So apart from the illegality of what the Zionist entity does inside Palestine with the Palestinians, they're in a number of violations of international conventions with the Lebanese, but somehow that is suspended, that dissipates, and the criminality of that's going on at this time are these Lebanese Arab terrorists, these generic Arab terrorists who really are criminals because they're stealing the valuables of the women as they leave the plane. That's what Menachem Golan is doing. That's the magical realism, right?
Right.
Sorry.
Why are you saying
Yeah. I mean, I think, thank you. I mean, I think one of the things is just the way, and this is typical of this type of movie, as well as just our media culture in the United States, intentionally so, right? Is just like the way that you will depict the event. And I think, Lara, you were talking about like, the way they're foreshadowing and setting it all up too, so that when things happen later on, it's like, oh, it's because these people are Jewish, right? Like, this kind of, work. But the way that it's just totally evacuated of all of the history surrounding it, right? And you see this even with like just a lot of people talking. I mean, first of all, there's a lot of people who love this movie, right? Which is like something we should, think about. But there are people who are like more normie critics, right, of it, who also will just say, well, like, it is kind of problematic that like there's no political context given within the film whatsoever. And this is something. One of the movies we watched early on in this series with Hiram was this film Nighthawks, where they had like these European terrorists coming to New York who are supposed to be, Red Brigades or like maybe Bader Meinhof, like, Red Army faction type folks, right? But it's this way, right, where all of they will do some sloganeering, right? So you have in this, and we can move into the airplane scene. You have a recognition that they're anti-imperialists, right? That they're opposed to Zionism, that they are, they're in, they'll reference Palestine, right? As like, our brothers in Palestine who, you've
they say Palestine.
No. You have all of these things referenced, right? But it is to empty them out, right? Because what you're seeing is just these people who seem, like you said, like subhuman, inhuman. Everybody's sweaty, but they particularly are. They're unhinged seeming and all of this, and so they're really not. They are seen as these terrorists that just have no real politics. And any politic that they mention is meant to make it seem like it's something that they don't actually really believe in, but are just using as a justification, right? And so like this is a very common kind of 80s theme, and it's still common with, I mean, like Marvel movies and stuff do this to this day of, they'll work in like, oh, there's a little bit of there's a comic book here, or there's a this, right? And it's like, you're not supposed to actually believe that the people who are doing these actions actually have kind of principled political motivations for them, but that what they're saying is an excuse to engage in some kind of savagery that they are predisposed towards, right? And that's part of how this kind of racism operates. And one other point that you raised, Stephen, that I think is important is just this notion of where this film, I think you both kind of raised it, is, you know, where this film sits in the period too, right? And we have the failure of Vietnam, again, the failure of the operation in Iran. It's also important that there was a Delta Force contingent that was activated for this hijacking, but Reagan was never willing to let them actually go through on their mission. He was too worried about, you know, whatever, loss of life, or that it would be another debacle or whatever. And I think too that, like, when we think about, you know, somebody like Menachem Golan and a film like this, it's like the Israelis sort of saying, look, like, we know how to do this counter-terror shit. Like, we're going to help you build up your own kind of imperial confidence again to join us in these kinds of efforts. And I think that it's not that they're the only ones making films like this. A lot of the 80s films that we talk about are about trying to rebuild that imperial confidence in the US. But I do think there is a specific kind of character to it in this film that you know, comes through. But yeah, let's talk more about the actual airplane.
The fun part, yeah. Yeah, no, but to your point here, I think later on in the film, they actually say, you know, when they have the phone call and they're like, oh, you need to go to Israel. They're like, they have everything you need.
Also, why Israel?
Yeah.
Because it's our favorite, it's
They're
our best friend in the Middle East.
You know,
just
it's all
in case
this,
you don't know.
exactly, all this propaganda. But to your point about the racism, about like that they don't have a platform, that this is just a front for everything else. What's amazing is that's juxtaposed next to these lay people, right? Even the nuns or all of that do have an analysis and say to them, you're freedom fighters. You don't want to be associated with Nazis who killed 6 million Jews. And he responds, not enough. They stole Palestine, right? Like, exactly. I'm not going to do the fucking voice. It's horrid. But that's the juxtaposition too, that even these sort of lay people that just found themselves caught up in this do have an analysis, and these terrorists don't, right? And even the analysis they have, I think at one point he says, you know, and all other anti-socialist atrocities, right? He can't say hijacking, but he can fucking say all other, you know, anti-socialist atrocities. That sort of, you know, tepid, puerile representation of even what liberation movements upheld and what they were for, it's immediate. I mean, he can't even say the word Beirut, right? So all the racism, like, he mispronounces Beirut, he does all these sorts of things, but most prominently, immediately when he pulls out the grenade, right? This is a hijack, this is a hijack, he keeps saying it, and then he goes, this is a grenade, this is a grenade. Like, how many fucking times do you have to say that, be so heavy-handed? But the most important is, I'm prepared to die. Which is really interesting when we're talking about imperialist films that have to do with the military, because a quote-unquote terrorist being prepared to die should make us deathly afraid, because that is what makes them the most dangerous thing. But imperial soldiers going to put their lives on the line for our freedoms, that are also prepared to die, that we're supposed to see as, you know, as sort of valor and just an extension of the ways that you really fight for freedoms and make imperialism. I mean, this continues to this day, but that is the immediate scene that we see. That I'm prepared to die makes them uniquely threatening, right? Because they're prepared to die for their own race. Like, we're supposed to see them as the racists. We're supposed to see them, and we can talk about the scene of separating Jewish. I mean, I think that's like the most horrifying scene that sort of, right, shows us. I mean, you don't have to wait very quickly for that foreshadowing to kind of, you know, see itself through and pan out. But and that's and the other thing is, through that hijacking, it moves really quickly, actually, right? There's so much that's packed in to such a short period of time, and then it gets slower and just they overdo it. But he can't even, like, you see these attempts to humanize them, but they don't quite, he can't quite do it. He can't quite get there, right? So you have this, like, the little girl and his daughter's name is a made up Arab name. It's not a real fucking name that he gives to human. So it's just all this, like, mishmash where to your point of racism, Jared, all that rises to the top is the saturation of racism, of an already constructed specter of the terrorists. You don't have to do much work, right? Panning to the priests and the nuns, like, this is how horrible these people are. And of course, it's Muslims that don't give a fuck that there's a priest, right? And he gets hit. I mean, it is so exactly. And that's the thing. And it's positioning them, right? They are the arch sort of representation of terrorism, uniquely because they're also Muslim. And then that vacates, of course, the political revolutionary aspects of this, or if they were PFLP or whatever the case. I mean, in this case, they were Amal, so they were Muslim. But that, I think that is what grabs people affectively immediately. And you actually don't have to do much work. You see them as, you see them as the bad guys consistently from that moment on. There is no recovering from that.
I mean, that it's related to build to a couple of things. Number one is there is a collapse between these are this is basically like Hezbollah, and
right.
They are collapsed with the PFLP, which were
exactly.
But also they're prepared to die. Remember, also comes out of the historical moment that the Islamic resistance or Hezbollah had blown up a Marine barracks at the airport in Beirut, which killed something like 250 Marines, and 3 months before that blew up the American embassy on the Corniche in Beirut, which ended up being like a big, American embassy and CIA headquarters. People forget that, and blew up the building, and that killed about 50 Americans as well. So this is the advent of the car bomb and suicide bombing. So that's where when he says, "I'm prepared to die," that's what everyone's thinking, even though Leila Khaled and Patrick Aguera also had hand grenades when they hijacked their planes. Two things I just want to say, and I would love to hear what you both have to say. So forgive me, I just want to put these on our map, which is we're talking about sort of the visual codes or nomenclature that is going on. What is particular to the Palestinian national movement, whether you're a Lebanese Arab or a generic Arab or a Palestinian, is behind every Arab is a Nazi.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Arabs are Nazis.
Mm-hmm.
Nazis are Arabs.
Mm-hmm.
Nazis are Arab. Nazis killed 6 million Jews. Arabs killed 6 million Jews. That's the association. Arabs are anti-Semites. Arabs and Nazis are anti-Semites, right? So you have that, and I think Matumi is the one to talk about the German steward flight attendant.
She was a stewardess back then in the 1980s. Thank you very much.
And she's like, "You look me, the death camps." It's like, yeah, bitch, that was you.
Yeah,
that was you. That was you. Had you not done that shit, maybe Palestine would not be occupied by Zionists. That's you, honey.
Yeah.
And it becomes transposed. Who's the Nazi? The Nazi's not the Nazi, right? And she's at an age, remember, when her father is literally a Nazi,
mm-hmm.
right? So, like, that's one thing that's constantly being activated. What Lara was saying could happen, the depoliticization, what you were saying, Jared, is you can say all the things that sound valid, but it's buffoonish. And we also know it's really not true, right? Because fundamentally, Arabs are the stand-in for Nazis, and the Holocaust is the Arabs' fault. And in fact, Arabs have to pay the price to give up their country, which is they're actually occupying anyway,
mm-hmm.
right? So that's one thing. Secondly, is this idea, the image of the child, right?
The imperious little white child.
With imperious, which actually is also several scenes from Leila Khaled's autobiography, where she's first sees a child, a little girl at the airport, and she has like an American girl, and she has like a shirt like "Be my friend" or something like that. And she starts to think, she's like, "Oh my God, it's terrible." And she said, "On the plane, I felt very protective of her." Right. And she started to have like think like her guilt, her conscience started to sort of thing. And she thought, I had to remember about the Palestinian children. And what she wasn't saying is, fuck that little kid, Palestinian children getting fucked. No, she was saying, we live in a world where that little child is protected by international order, but the whole international order has failed the Palestinian people. And it's within that world of failure. If you're a Palestinian, you don't live in a world that's governed by international law. You're governed by a necro-Zionist rule, imperial rule. Mm-hmm. And that's the rules in which you have to conduct your resistance, right? But we see those kids being reworked as, you know, the little child who has the innocence of the child sees the dirty little Arabs with their guns, right? Don't look now, you're being rude, but dad, right?
Yeah.
And that kid is,
well, he's
that
suspicious
kid, that
already.
Kid looks at that. No, you can see, rather than seeing that, this kid has been like given racial codes really early on.
Yes.
Right? This kid is a little racist, right? Rather than seeing that, you're seeing this kid as like the harbinger of truth, right? And so there's all this like a weird like child play. Of course, the kid is also like, you know, it comes, you know, they don't like Jews very much, do they, mommy? No, they don't like Jews, right? The child is this, you know, innocent voice of truth. And of course, and then you have the dolly, and the kid's like, yeah, I like my daughter too. You're like my daughter. I like daughters. Daughters. Well, dude, like, you know, it's like so creepy.
Yeah, well, later on, then the father goes, "Don't you dare touch my daughter,"
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Which, like, all of that is in there. Oh, I have more to say about that German lady and the hysterics, but we can get into it once we get to that scene.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I kind of then eventually even get confused with the film because, like you said, it's so mushed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, you know, we could actually, I don't mind getting to Hannah Shaigulia's character because she's interesting that she's in this film because while Fassbender is not someone who I think politically was always very solid, one of his big things in his movies was that, look, German Nazism is part of our kind of cultural heritage, right? So this, what you said, Stephen, that your father was, that's what Fassbender would have said to Shaigulia, right? Which is very interesting to me that she's in this film. But also, I think it goes to show that the actors who work with directors aren't necessarily the directors as well. And I'm not saying Fassbender had his own problems. I also want to really, really, really put that in there in some of his films. But I found that interesting because, yeah, when I'm watching the film, I'm like watching it as someone who's like coming in trying to get these people to tell me what it is. You know, Martin Balsam raising his hand to get the passport, and you see the death camp branding on his arm, these kind of slow, and then I think also using actors like Martin Balsam and people who know Martin Balsam, 12 Angry Men. I mean, these are actors, Shelley Winters, these are actors who are like American staples. So, you know, Jared Ball talks about this a lot. You're not watching, I don't even know his character's name. I know that's Martin Balsam. I know that's Shelley Winters, right? I know that's George Kennedy standing up, showing the Christians, you know, showing Christian, like, you know, solidarity with them. So I'm primed to like emotionally connect with these actors that I've watched for 20, 30, 40 years or whatever, all your lives and all these movies, right? And how that kind of like sits into your soul. And I'm watching it and I'm going, I mean, this is a crock of garbage. Right, this whole entire thing when you're being juxtaposed, because the other thing, and this came up a lot when I was growing up in the 90s, of, you know, us, the anti-Semitism coming from what they would say coming from people of color being immediately put into Nazism, and us putting and us being put into this kind of big soup. right? And you could see the manipulation of that like easily, because situating this actress, her making this actress also who just has a cinematic purchase also, because she was an international star as well. So her doing this movie also kind of says, well, yes, we stand behind this read of history. So, you know, the cinematic community, the art house community sits behind this read as well. And, you know, it becomes this I felt the circling of the wagons of all these different power positions within Hollywood, the larger film industry connected to political projects. I mean, because one of the things that even Lee Marvin said, he said very specifically, he said, I thought it was an important film to do. He really said this is an important film to do, like even beyond, he said it was fun, but it was also important. The fact that it was fun also was just perverse, right? But you could see it, like when you're watching these things happen with the hijacking and how they're shooting the people. Because look, if you also think Shelley Winters and even Susan Strasberg is barely in the movie. It's like, why would Susan Strasberg even do this? I'm watching. She has no character, right? But you get these like prime shots of them, these like long dripped out music. They're, you know, being pulled through the seats and these like long shots. And I'm like, oh, wow, this is really the cinematic community rallying around this imperialist narrative, which is like the point of this whole series, is that Hollywood and then the extensions of it are really rallying around this really conservative, right-wing imperial agenda. Not saying that they were super divorced from it, even in the 70s or previous eras, but there's definitely a real qualitative shift. And you see it happening just in the cinematic, like the people who are agreeing to do this stuff, and they're coming in and how they're positioned in the film. I mean, and I'll say one other thing, because the film, Jay brought up a point, the film was critically panned, but not necessarily for its politics. Some people say this is pretty, you know, this is tasteless or something like that. They would go that far. But it was panned because it was heavy-handed or violent or things like that. But it was really given a kind of soft pat because they probably agreed with it. They just thought it should be done a little bit smoother.
It was panned because the last half of the movie is Chuck Norris shooting missiles out of the butt of the motorcycle. I mean, like,
right. That's what it was.
A comment quickly I wanted to respond to, and then you all can keep going. But Gemma brought up in the chat that Goddard's King Lear came through canon the following year from this. And I did want to make this point just because you're talking about prestige and these prestigious artists and stuff like that in canon. And I think part of it was that they were willing to pay people, and sometimes they were willing to pay people who their window was seen as kind of over. They also did some projects where they would let these more kind of art house, like kind of famous artistic directors do kind of whatever they want to do, and be fairly hands off, because their whole thing was like, we're trying to make like 50 movies a year. But I also think when you think about a movie like this, you talked about it being relatively high budget especially for canon and in the 80s. But you think about that, and like you think about watching this film, there's not a lot within this film that would be very expensive to make, especially when you think that it's shot on scene in, 48 Palestine, right? Or the entity now known as Israel. I'm sure that Menachem got a sweetheart deal, if not just free, to like be able to do this, because it was seen as a, positive propaganda PR project for, the Zionist entity, right? And so I think probably a lot of that money went into getting these names connected into it. Just a couple of other.
I'll add one thing. I'll add one thing to that quick. Lee Marvin said they were the only studio to give complete upfront money, because usually what happens when you do a film, you get half up front and you get half on the back. So that this is really a thing that Marlon Brando kind of started when he would just not finish movies. So you would basically it started where if you got $10 million, you get the 5 up front and then 5 upon completion, right? Canon stopped doing that, they gave them all the money up front, and they shot everybody out in like really short days. So I'm sure Susan Strasberg made a couple $1 million, barely having a line.
Yeah. So just a couple of people to point out. So John Cassavetes, who's like a very, well-known independent filmmaker, does a film with them called Love Streams. Jean-Luc Godard, who's a high-profile French director, does his adaptation of King Lear. Toby Hooper, who we all already had talked about, also did Chainsaw Massacre 2, right? He does that with them.
He does about 4. He does a lot of films with them. Yeah, I mean, that terrible Life Force movie, which I don't want to get into.
Yeah. So they did have this reputation too of bringing in folks that were well respected, and I mean, of course, they're famous for paying Sylvester Stallone like more money than anybody ever been paid at the time to do Over the Top, which at some point we have to do Over the Top because it's one of the most hilarious movies of the 80s. But yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to say that too in terms of some of the people in it. But keep going, Lara and Stephen. Like, where do you want to go next?
You wanted to say something about the.
You still on?
No, I'm not.
So
I'm good.
Just to say, Sally Winters, it's Poseidon Adventure on a plane. So she's importing this sort of a need to escape from a sinking ship vibe. That's all.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to say, because to me, you already brought up the sort of seeing the branding, right? The health, and so. One of the things I wanted to talk about psychologically, both in terms of what Stephen had already set up about the psychic inversion that happens, right? Where you see when she has this meltdown, all of these are confessions as well, right? They're colonial confessions, and they're also violent confessions of the oppressors, where she says, don't you understand? I'm a German, the death camps, I can't do what you're asking me to do. In that moment, we're invited into the psychic inversion. So yes, it's like the Palestinian, behind every Palestinian is a Nazi, but the mechanics of it psychologically and affectively is based on a psychic inversion where you see it happening in real time, where the responsibility of the Holocaust is the Arabs. It's not the German, because this German has purified herself, right? Can't you see? I just can't do this anymore, and you're asking me to do what I had nothing to do with. I mean, it's the sort of consciousness, like تغسيل الضمير, we say it in Arabic, is literally the washing of the conscience, and you see it in real time. But what that positions, of course, is who's responsible for this. The confession that I'm also saying is that as a German, she makes the connection for us through her point of view, of course, which is why it's more affectively sort of has traction. When he reaches and gives her the passport and you see the branding, the number sort of come out, she's clocking that because she's a fucking German. That doesn't come back up. The terrorists, quote unquote, don't look at that never gets picked back up. The Holocaust has no bearing on what they're doing. Of course, there's a collapse of Israelis and Jews and the Hebrew ring. Like, that's the facile nature of it. Like, their anti-Semitism is also so shallow that there is not, I mean, you have this throwaway line, it was not enough, right? It was not enough Jewish people that were murdered, because that is the facile sort of anti-Semitism that we're so used to, that it's so bad that it's all about that. But it's really the German that can see the significance. And that part is never taken. That's the psychic inversion that's really interesting for me. And of course, they say, not again, right? She said, when he gets up, he's the first person. It has to be him that's the first person that walks, of course, to the closed, the first class is closed, right? You're invoking such heavy-handed imagery about gas chambers and all these sorts of things. And he says, not again, which of course, he doesn't say never again. They say not again. We survived this once. We'll just survive it again. But what I was really fascinated with is that could not have happened without the crux of the German fucking bringing this into the scene. But the entire displacement is onto the Arab, right? Because they're really the ones. Yes, it's the Germans who did it, but the Germans have made up for this shit. These Arabs are fucking still going. right? These Arabs can't get over this. They can't get over the fact that Palestine, not Palestine, not Palestine even, like say it with a fa, that would make more sense, or a ba, that would make sense. But I'm just fascinated psychologically that that's the confession. You needed the German. She needed to be there for this to become mobilized in a particular way, and also for the complicity of, I'm thinking about Palestine now, the complicity of Germany in the genocide that extends in the genocide in Palestine right now, extend backwards to that moment where somehow they, the architects of all of this, have rehabilitated themselves so much that we forget, like Stephen was saying, that it was you're the ones who fuck, and you're still the same anti-Semitic genocidal fuckers that you were back then. There's no rehabilitation of that, but you needed her as a crux to do this affectively and then entirely forget what Germany's role continues to be in this.
One thing just quickly to say too, because you referenced this kind of early on, Stephen, of sort of like, if you grew up as an Arab in the 80s, like you didn't need to see a movie like this because it was what the nightly news kind of was. And I mean, I do think it's important just again to situate, this movie comes out less than a year after the actual TWA Flight 847 hijacking, which again leads to a successful negotiation by the resistance of the release of all of these wrongfully held political prisoners, etc. Right? And interestingly, yeah, part of the reason that they say that it wasn't an exchange is Israel says like, oh, well, we were just planning to release them anyway. Whoops, sorry, we didn't mean to have those people in our prisons anyway, right? But there are, and I went back and looked at some of these. There are some of these terrible articles written by like the New York Times in like 1985 about this that do actually like, where if you read that as like normie white US person and then you watch this movie, you would be like, oh yeah, they're just telling the story of what actually happened, because again they do the same kind of thing where they're not talking about the history, they're not talking about like what's going on or what led up to this, or like what actually is the political struggle that's going on between the different actors involved, right? And so then you do get left with and this was a discussion in the media of, they separated the Jews, they took the Marine or the Navy guys, right? And this kind of thing. And so those were actually some of the pieces of negotiation around this, but then you create this like very cartoonish way of displaying it in film, and then like this kind of caricature and heavy-handed, like people always need to explain, oh, this is happening because you're anti-Semitic, or mommy, they don't like the Jews, and oh, it's the Holocaust all over again, I'm the German flight attendant who can explain this to you, right? And so like all these ways that like narratively and within the film, it can take pieces that it's hard to know how much of it was like accurate representation of went on with the plane, because obviously the people who are on that plane are also indoctrinated into like Western propaganda about a lot of this stuff too. But these stories that would have filtered into like details, right, that would show up in the New York Times or show up on the nightly news that would get reported out and talked about, basically would then be supported by audiences by a film like this, and deepen their commitment to like a kind of racist propaganda that they're already reading within their news as well.
So it's funny. Yeah, I'll add one last thing and then I'll throw another thing in here and we can go from there. Like another thing about that is like where Germany had also positioned themselves time around the film world post the war. I mean, Berlin Film Festival is like one of the kind of pillar festivals. And, Golden Globe has had this dream you know, to be respected on that level. Like you see those like images of them running through Cannes in their like weird jumpsuits. I mean, it's so disgusting. But you just see this courting for like European inclusion, right? And I think about this a lot about the discourse around the Zionist entity wanting to be European included in terms of refined culture, right? And, you know, to show yourself as refined, you have to show who the unrefined are, right? So you demonize, right? And yeah, it's so interesting. The other thing from those sequences that really hit me are the American soldiers on the plains, right? And this I mean, the totality of the film, right? The idea that the American soldier is the one that needs to be protected. It is like uniquely vulnerable at all times, right? The you know, they're on the plane, like, and like, you know, you see, and this is where they always put the black people. This is where they always put the brothers, right? You have a black American soldier, right? And then you have Steve James, who's part of the Delta Force, right? And Steve James was a regular in Canon films. That's another thing. He's in those terrible American ninja movies as well. But this invoking of the soldier is like uniquely vulnerable immediately to get us on their side, because, you know, we need them positioned because we have this world that's out of control, right? And I'm thinking about myself as a young black man, right? What that does to me. I see Steve James, right? He gets to be somewhat heroic, not in this movie, but in kind of the American Ninja movies he does. And then you see the brother, who I don't even know who that is, as one of the soldiers who were captured, right? And you immediately see them making the attempt to try to get the kind of buy-in of American people around this. Yeah, I'd be curious y'all thoughts on that stuff or any other thing, because the soldiers thing then became really, really big to me, and I could see them really trying to pull it all in.
Let's see.
Go for it.
Sure. You want to start? I got a lot, but
Well, I have of course it was like, it wasn't surprising, right? You had to have them come on the scene. And then I think they like, they're Navy, but then the quote unquote terrorists
SEALs,
say that they're
basically.
Marines,
yeah.
right? So it's just like, also like somehow these people don't know anything about, or they just didn't notice in the script. I don't know. The script is so fucking bad. It could be either thing. It could be like they just mixed it up, right?
And that's a quickly like that's supposedly like Golan to a T. Like, is that all of his shit is like he would just, I mean, this was in the documentary of like, oh, just make up a script on the spot, like extemporaneously, and like this stuff gets cut together and it doesn't make sense. So all the like continuity errors and the script stuff, like it's just poor filmmaking, right? But yeah, go ahead.
They never had like an ending to scripts. They didn't know what was going to happen. But the important thing to what you were saying too, man, on the one hand, you see this sort of dichotomy that's always at play. On the one hand, the soldier is always so precarious in terms of safety, but then also always resourceful and can take on, right? And is like, really can I mean, later we can say this, not one fucking American soldier dies of these, like all the shooting that was happening.
Well,
one does in the end, of course, because we saw it from the beginning that he was going to be the one. But it's really remarkable, the superhuman nature of it, right? That it becomes that. So even in this scene, they're like talking to each other, huddling, and they're like, there's only two of them. We can take them. We can do this. They're not. Meanwhile, this at the same time, you're seeing everybody be terrified about the lethality of these terrorists because they have a grenade. But here we are brought into the mind of the American soldier that can do the ethical sort of thinking through and has the ability to overcome and outsmart these dumb, barbaric, primitive, you know, people who have not thought this through, don't have any plan. It's really remarkable because you're constantly having to kind of toe that line of they need our help, they need our support, our hearts, you know, we need to support ourselves. Thank you for your service. All the shit that later comes out in American imperialism when having to do with the military, but they can't be that and also weak.
Mm-hmm.
They have to have this internal fortitude in which they're able to see all the, you know, later on, and this is something we might get into, so much so that they land in a foreign nation and know all the roads. Like, that's what I mean about the superhuman. Like, they don't need GPS, they don't need anything. They already know the lay of the land. So this dichotomy of like, they're always in danger and in peril because of somebody else's violence, but internally they are really solid. And if they just were able to do the things that we need them to do, they'll always come out on top, and they'll always make us proud, and they'll always be, you know, have integrity and be the soldiers we need them to be, like the face of empire. Go ahead. I think you have a lot more to say.
No. I mean, I
Just fucking hate this shit.
No. I think, you know, what you were saying about, you know, I love this idea that the soldier needs to be protected.
Yeah.
We want to remember that this is the thing. This is the reference to actually the historical event that the militants executed a Navy SEAL and threw him and beat his ass and then executed him and threw him on the Beirut tarmac. Rather than thinking, like, again, this is not an endorsement of murder. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm not saying that's a happy thing.
Because somebody on Twitter is going to make this clip of
exactly.
you.
But the idea that somehow the choice of beating and executing to show you that you mean business, a soldier is actually a different sort of choice than getting that random Jew who has been now, saying so scared for, who was, the 7 Jews that they pulled off the plane, or the little baby child, or the whatever, right? The rando is to show that, like, this person is actually more of a victim, rather than us to understand this is a logical choice for these militants to choose Navy SEALs. By the way, also what had happened, this was referenced, and George Kennedy denies it. He says, in very bad, broken English, the one of the militants says, the New Jersey bombed Beirut, right? Which actually was as a historical fact that the USS New Jersey intervened in the Lebanese Civil War and started to bomb certain positions in favor of the Lebanese forces and the Israelis. They actually, and this is a very famous event that happened in Lebanese. All Lebanese know about. I mean, Marcel Khalifi has a song about this. Everybody knows about this. And then, the priest who only speaks truth says, no, it's not even true, right? This sort of disavowal. And so the point is like
you have it wrong.
The logical choice of a soldier, again, not defending it. Us as analyzing this, the lot makes sense. But even though that makes sense, somehow, to me, like you were saying, somehow that victim is more of a victim, right? He's even more of the victim because he's so heroic. Because he's this helpless Navy SEAL soldier. Little baby SEALs, we love them, right? Little baby Navy SEALs needs to be protected. And actually, then, I don't know how much after, but one thing I noticed is that the movie changes such tempo.
Oh yeah.
With the landing, with the rescue landing, right? It turns from the sort of, again, dirty dozen-y, real gritty kind of guy to Chuck Norris becomes superhuman. The landing is a D-Day landing, right? You can talk about the tunnels, right? These guys now magically become a D-Day invasion, and the whole tenor changes. And that's when, St. Elmo's fire music kicks in, and they keep, the cheap version of St. Elmo's, that little thing that they have, that little
which
hook.
Was a great choice, Jay.
Yes.
That's why it was a great choice.
And then the whole tempo changes precisely because, like, look, we're not those vulnerable little Navy SEALs that need to be protected. This is what they need to be doing, right? This is what they're actually doing. This is the making sure that we punish those people who kill them, right?
I think it's the soldiers that whisper at some point Nazis, There's a whispering scene at one point that I picked up on. It was either
When they're
the
dragging the
Jewish folks
Jews
who
to the
are,
front,
yeah, I
I
think it
think.
was the three soldiers that like whisper under their breath, Nazis, right? So there's also this like not even subliminal messaging around how we're supposed to receive them. And of course, they're on the right side. Right?
Yeah, great stuff. The chat is having a lot of fun. I just thought of the 30-year-old baby boy pulled from his tank. Yeah. And then poor John McCain, he did a few years in Hanoi for indiscriminately bombing civilians, you know. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate, you know, the points about that. And I mean, I think it's fine to move into other parts of the movie, honestly, because there's really like, you get, as we've talked about this, there's a scene in the airport, then you get the hijacking scene. Most of that is fairly like just making the same points over and over again about these guys are racist, they're anti-Semites, they're, you know, they're inhuman, et cetera, et cetera. Also in the movie, and I don't know if this tracks with reality at all, although I know that the point about them actually shooting the soldier and dumping him on the tarmac was real, but I don't know whether there was an attempt like they show in the film for Delta Force to possibly you know, raid the plane at that point. I know that they were told to stand down in the film, and that they also were not allowed to act in real life, but I don't know whether that has any, but like in the film, it, even to have it make a little bit more sense, they execute the soldier basically after Delta Force almost like raids the whole plane basically, and as they're taking off again to go somewhere else. And that part was real, at least from what I read, is that part of the reason that the excuse that they made of why Delta Force didn't ever, you know, retake the plane was that because they kept refueling and flying back and forth, and they would try to chase it after it would go and couldn't catch up to them and all this kind of stuff, right? And you know, anyway, so it moves into this. Then we get to this point where they figure out in the film that some of the hostages have been taking, that militants have come onto the plane, which is why they don't jump on, because initially they think there's just two of them, and they're like, we can take these two guys, right? We have a whole battalion of Delta Force or whatever. And then they get called off because there's a recognition of, actually, no, there's a whole bunch more militants who have boarded the plane in Beirut. There's also, we should say, an insinuation within the film, which is totally historical, like gobbledygook, that there's a relationship between the militants on the plane and the Lebanese military, right? That they're actually working together, and that, you know, the state, which like initially doesn't want them to land there, but it seems like they know what's going on, right? And so there's kind of this, you know, again, which is just very much makes sense with a Zionist writing the film, I guess we could say, right? Of just say like, oh, well, they're pretending like they're not on the same team, but really these guys are all on the same team. So there's that goes on. But then in that scene where they almost, you know, attack the plane and then do not, they find out that like the Jewish passengers and the Navy guys, the ones that were not killed, have been taken to a prison, a couple prisons, I think, in Beirut, right? And so this then sets the stage kind of for Delta Force to go into Israel. Why? Because it's our greatest ally, and they help us with everything. They'll give us whatever we want, as you all referenced earlier on. And it's 20 minutes from Beirut, so perfect, you know, perfect location. Just happens to be placed there. And
yes, Palestine is 20 minutes from Beirut.
And so anyways, I mean, from that, like, we get to see the depiction, which I think is also a really important thing that I think I know you'll both have notes on too, of what Lebanon looks like within this movie, right? And Yeah, I mean, you guys can take it anywhere you want in the film at this point because the rest of it is pretty much just action. But yeah,
This is what I've been
Let it go, let it go, girl.
I'm gonna let it all
Let it
out.
go.
Yeah. So there's a landing in Beirut, right? That happens before Algeria, which is when, you know, they then find all of this out. And that's the piece that's really amazing, right? They land in Beirut, and the Minister of Defense is first of all, nobody speaks with a Lebanese accent, right? None of these. There's one person who does, but he's actually Egyptian. He's an Egyptian,
he's Egyptian
actor
Israeli
who
actually has one guy
exactly who like puts on a Lebanese accent, which is actually, I mean, that's what I mean about not having to try. You like they're banking on the fact that nobody's gonna fucking understand this. Half the shit you can't even understand. The actors, all of that, but they land, and the minister says to our point of the racism, before also of you know, that this mess, this chaos. The Minister of Defense says we have enough trouble without you people, right? Like, you can't land here. We have enough trouble without you people, which is already setting up the shithole we're going to see, right? Like, no way. And then of course the American, the sort of pilot being like, we're coming in for landing, whether you like it or not, whether we have your permission or not. Like, all these things of who breaks rules, who does shit, you know, with permission, who can sort of bully their way into things, who's actually doing things for the greater good versus these, you're either just terroristic and, you know, hell-bent on creating as much chaos and violence and cruelty as possible, or you're just idiotic and don't realize how big and how, you know, how important this landing is, right? So we land immediately. The Amal is written on, in Arabic, it says Amal. Like, there's graffiti on some of the jeeps, so the military jeeps. But this is the thing, Jared, that you were saying about, like, that's the first time we see that the Lebanese army is in cahoots with these quote unquote terrorists, right? And all these quote unquote terrorist groups are all working together. All the factions, what's Amal, what's Hezbollah, what's PFLP, doesn't really matter because they're all terrorists in the imaginary, right? In the racist sort of imperial imaginary. But that's when we see that main guy who's really talking about it. Later on in the film, of all the threads they drop, I love that it's the like deeply racist ones that they just can't drop. Later on in the film, when they're coming for the saving, you know, moment, they say something like, let's do it now, otherwise all of Beirut will be on the tarmac. Which is the sort of, this is the coming back to it, is that everybody is a combatant. I want us to bring it back to Gaza right now and Palestine, is that it's not just that the Lebanese army is working, it's that every potential male, especially because women are just entirely vacant. There's like no one. You see these weirdo,
the nativity scene.
Yeah, the nativity scene people. You see people later and they're not even dressed like, it's not even Arab dress, like even
it's a Christmas nativity scene.
It's totally, and these like random like women will just like, you know, scurry by. The women are completely missing. So of course this is all, but every man and boy has the potential to be an enemy combatant, right? And that all of it is like, all of Beirut will end up on the tarmac. This is the scene when they land in Beirut, is the scene that the little girl says to her mom, what do you think they're talking about, Mom? And she says, I don't know, maybe about Jews, right? She even says, like, I don't know, maybe about Jews. They don't like Jews, huh, Mama? No, they don't like Jews. So now we're in Beirut and they're saying here too, it's not just in the air space, these like random, you know, floating terrorists. These terrorists have a home base. And that home base also is fundamentally anti-Semitic, and no, they don't love the Jews. Then they cut to this fucking, this is the thing I texted Jay. I'm like, Beirut, center of town, terrorist headquarters. Okay, that's the actual heading. I lost my shit on this. I mean, I just squealed. I was like, what the fuck is this? Beirut, center of town, terrorist headquarters. And of course, it's about bringing down global empire. Now, one thing is the graffiti is accurate. All the graffiti in Arabic is actually accurate, which I was actually delightfully surprised. It's really good graffiti. It's like down with empire. It's
the handwriting's not always the best.
The handwriting's horrible, but it actually wasn't just like, you know, those like printout tattoos of
Well,
Arabic.
they've invaded Lebanon enough where they have picked
They know exactly. Their Waltz with Bashir was full of it too. But this is the thing that when you see it as an imperial fantasy, you see Beirut as a desert. On the one hand, we're in the middle of a city, this bustling city that used to be the Las Vegas.
The airport's flat.
Right. So maybe that's their thing. If they think Las Vegas, they think about, you know, a desert. I don't know. But this is the imperial fantasy of like this desert. I don't even want to use reference points. A lot of times we reach reference, we're like, it looks like Afghanistan. It looks like this. It doesn't fucking, what it is a projection of empires, imaginary of where these people live. It's also a Zionist fucking myth, right? Of going into a desert and making the desert bloom. There was nothing here before. And this is what in the documentary, actually, when they say that the two of them together, you don't fuck with sabras. Sabra is the cactus plant, right? So these two Israeli producers are saying you don't fuck with sabras. That's telling us how they imagine themselves, that they are the rooted cactus plant.
Well, the sabras is self-referential. Israelis call themselves sabras. The first generation of Israelis steal the word sabra from Arabic to call themselves the pioneers.
Exactly.
The pioneers.
And that's the sort of thing that you see. So it's also not just an imperial, it's also a Zion, and this is where they come together, that these two forces are come together. And I think that probably bothered me the most. I have to say, this representation of Beirut just was so deeply disturbing to me because it was such a lucid representation of the mind of the colonizer that at once sees something so primed for picking, but also one that is endlessly open for development, and like it's just no one's there. This is why later on when we see no people inhabiting center city of Beirut, this bustling city, we only have quote unquote combatants, and then nobody else is there. It's just an empty place, which again, a confessional, just sort of like, I mean, Columbus, we just get there and there's nobody there and we're just fucking taking over. And look, we're actually doing a favor because us being here, like the Zionists, is what made this come into being in its full force. So there's something that really just sat with me through the whole time. I think, I mean, the before the racism and terrorism, maybe because I'm just so fucking, you know, used to it. Like I'm so jaded by it. I can read it textually and understand the history of what we see today. But to see it so, maybe also against the backdrop of Gaza and rubble, that I just, and then the what's it called, the tunnels, that suddenly the tunnels, these tiny little fucking water tunnels, right, expand for the US Delta Force and become these massive tunnels. And I cannot see these things without thinking about Palestine and about resistance fighters. And to your point, Mitsumi back in terms of Chuck Norris or whatever the thing is that this idea of who dwells in tunnels and how threatening they are, and you know, the US military sort of boots on the ground going in tunnels to do their mission is not bad, but native peoples of the land finding ways to resist occupation that comes in, and that's the intruding force, somehow becomes, you know, inverted as the real threat here. All of that, I think maybe that's why it was so fucking, that change of tempo ends up being so disturbing to me because of all this, because of the moment in which I'm watching. I mean, I hadn't watched it before, and then just seeing again this infrastructure being built for this moment in which we are seeing this in real time, and the material impact of the violence of empire and its work with Zionism from its inception. And all of that was distilled into this landing in Beirut. The last thing I'll say about this is when they go to Algeria, they're dressed up in civilian clothes, right? And the quote unquote terrorists are in a school. So this is the thing about laying down these like signifiers that we now see happening in Palestine and in Gaza, that terrorists take over schools, right? And they dress, and then the military, the American military, dress like ambulance drivers. They dress like, and we know that Zionists actually do that in Gaza. They do that, and they use the same sorts of things. This is back in the 1980s. No rules apply to empire. Everything they do is in service of the good, this, whether it's human shields or wearing civilian clothing or any of the fuckery that they do, right, to cause the most harm to people. It's inverted in real time, and we're seeing it, of course, in its most, you know, stunning display of aggression in Gaza. Do you want to say more? I'm really angry.
Yeah, no, I like it. I like it. Yeah, you were really happy when you saw Bailey. Mutumi, did you want to say something before I said?
No. You can go. I mean, I'll add a couple things. I mean, I'm glad because when that Lara, get your sharing of that, because when I watched it, I tried to go back to when I was when I was younger, and you start thinking about these places without history. But on this one of the things that also disturbed me about the film, of the many things, is this idea that when military comes in, they're like precise and, you know, and precision, and do, you know, when they shoot the missiles, they get the missiles right there. And so I was like, okay, well, I also see why you're clearing out civilians out of this concept that collateral damage, that words that they would use also, which I think is a disgusting kind of phrase. The Delta Force doesn't do that. That doesn't happen. Civilians won't get that way. And then also for me, if a place does look like it's been destroyed, then I would implant that the Lebanese people destroyed it themselves, not American imperialist militaries constant aggression on an area. So you never make that connection. It's like you and then you get this, they want you to get this high about militarism, where not only is American militarism more moral than any other kind of militarism around the world, but also because it's so moral, it's so much more precise and exact. And then who's the only like victim? Some American soldier at the end. And the way that Norris does the killings of the various, you know, hijackers, and of course when he has this final thing with Robert Forrester, right? This need to like embarrass and have this really, it's just super violent like murder of these people. And I'm watching it, and it just makes me think about this idea, you know, that whiteness, their fear of men of color, as where are these, like, you know, I mean, one of the, not to go too sidetrack, one of the on horrible conversations I had, I got a Zionist to admit that he believes truly that everyone who is dark really wants to kill him. Right? I had to really pull it out of him. I was like, come on. Like just finally say it. And I'm watching it and I'm seeing Norris do that. It's the one where he shoots the guy in the head under the bed. And I was just like, man, this your fantasy that you want to act out of really wanting to just murder these men, right? And I was like, you know, and that but also the fact that, like, if these places are struggling, that it has nothing to do with your aggression, because when you come in precise, you get in and then you get out. Right. And I'm like, get the fuck out of here. We know that's not true. Like, even people who are like kind of middle ground on American imperialism go, yeah, we know. I mean, civilians do die, though. Right. They do say that shit. And it's like, it's such bullshit. Right. And it's infuriating when to watch that. And because it's so cavalier also.
Absolutely. They're also invisible. Like, what I kept thinking, and then I'll pass it along to you, is, you know, when if you have kids, if anybody has kids and they play invisible and you like pretend you don't see them, but they're standing right in front of you, right? And they're like hide in plain sight, and you're supposed to be like, I don't see you. The fact that they walk in and take over these things, nobody hears them, nobody sees them. These guys are just like, they hear it at one point and then they're like, no, it's nothing. Let's keep playing cards. Like, these militants somehow don't have training in the same way, right? And that they can, the they can come in and put dynamite and just pull out. They're like the Mary Poppins fucking bag. Pull out a ladder that they snuck in to a tunnel that suddenly becomes a massive tunnel for them only. And then come out in there like, but they're invisible. I mean, that's the thing, right? It's all these things to be able to kill the superhuman, right, Black and brown people and their strength then suddenly transform as idiotic, people who deserve humiliation, of course. And that's, I think, like we were saying, there's no sexual innuendo in all of this. This is a gendered film, and people get off on that shit. People get off on that shit because racism is also libidinal, right? And racism against Black and brown people, and particularly Arabs and Palestinians here in the imaginary of Zionism, they do get off on that. And that's why it has to be humiliating. That's why you have to show them as fundamentally weak people who then get it in the end. And they get it in the end from behind. Like, it's just so fucked up in terms of how it is, but it's playing on this sexualized violence that is tied up in the might of the American military and how people are just so invested libidinally in all of that.
No, you set it up perfectly. I mean, I was going to say, again, like, just to bring it back to sort of like the fabric of the film, if you look about how it kind of unfolds, like I said, like they're at the D-Day moment, they're coming in, and then they, like you said, they pull that just like they pull that ladder out of
nowhere. I don't know,
out of their Mary Poppins bag, right?
And their scuba diving outfit.
When they make a Wile E. Coyote hole in the thing, right? Just like you have that. If you remember when they did the land, when they have that little boat and they bring it up, and somehow they see the guys walking in chest deep water, and the next thing it's militarized surf party boys, right? They have all the buggies, right? And they're magically all in their covert operation outfits with their badges, right? And they're all like
in
white,
their Tron
outfits. They're all like white boy surfer dudes hanging onto like beach buggies that are painted black with all this weird non-existent armaments, these big sort of look like sound cannons, but they're big cannons. And somehow you have it's like I said, it was like watching militarized Beach Boys or something like this, right? And they just magically appear on the beach, all lined up for the shot, right? They didn't have, somehow they just kind of flew from that
beach,
that ship to the empty beach, 20 meters away from the headquarters or wherever, so at one level you have the complete, and that's when like I said, the cartoon music, the cartoon almost fire music starts kicking in, tempo comes up, and if you really realize, if you're really looking closely basically or paying attention, that's when Chuck Norris becomes supernatural. Right? All the other stuff. Okay, maybe he goes in and maybe he can pull someone from the fire. Maybe he can do those sorts of things. The stuff in Algeria, nothing's super unrealistic-y kind of. But then when they land, it becomes a Saturday morning cartoon, right? And he's literally zip lining with does he have a gun, or does he have I think he has the bazooka or the RPG, which by the way, the RPG was an incredibly effective Hezbollah and resistance a weapon against the occupying forces. So he comes in with his RPG, zip tying down through the camp and no one can shoot them. Everyone that somehow there's not an Arab in the world who can shoot straight, right? And it becomes this whole magical sort of cartoon thing where they're just the buggies, they're shooting people, they're killing people, and like you said, he has to have the zinger line, right? And it was like, sleep tight, sucker. And when he kills this terrorist, who's this seasoned terrorist, by the way, is hiding under the bed. That's his thing. He's hiding, not even with a gun, right? He doesn't he's trying to be invisible, right? He's just not that he would have a gun and try to shoot up at him,
but it's
right?
the same thing they said about Sinwar, that they hide between people, and it's just like that.
I mean,
that's part of it.
It's just he becomes, again, this terrorist is completely emasculated. He has nothing. He gets shot in cold blood, and it's sleep tight, sucker, and everything after that, all violence after that is a one-way violence. It's a supernatural violence. It's a superhuman violence against people who are buffoonish, who have no skills. And like you said, Lara, they're driving around their buggies, blowing up every place. And, when they finally track, of course, like the guy, the main guy, the main, terrorist, he hides. No one sees him, but Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris is the only one. I'll catch up to you guys.
The beacon
Let
on
me
the
go
hill.
get the bad guy.
Yeah.
And then he goes up and breaks into someone's house and
sunrise.
beats him up. And then, of course, as Lara said, I mean, he literally farts him to death, right? Like magically, you get this like missile coming out of the motorcycle tailpipe, which we have not seen, by the way. And he has these like little boner missiles that on the thing, pew, pew, and like Lara said when we were talking, it's like he doesn't have to aim. And
they also magically, replenish themselves.
It magically replenishes that. Like, yeah, you see two come up, and then
like
5 scenes later he's shooting. It's just and that's the thing. It's so over the top, like cartoonish. But what we're told is, this is the righteous fight. Right. And when we talk about, Lara was just incensed when she saw the pictures of Beirut, right? And not for any cosmopolitan reason, just because it was basically because it was like a bunch of concrete.
So fucking offensive.
It was just horrible. But what's really interesting is if you remember the training scene inside Israel, they're having training by the IOF, and it's in very realistically how the military have these like fake little Arab desert villages. Mm-hmm. So it looks like a training scene. That's all this is. This is one big fucking training movie, to think that you can go carry out the Imperial mission because these guys are weak and they're just literally there, and you see them coming up. And actually, the imagery also starts, right? They're animals, they're ants, they're whatever. Here they come up.
Hordes.
Ooh, the hordes, right? They're hordes.
In their own country.
They're hordes in their own country. They don't know anything. They don't even know that the two guys, Chuck Norris and the brother, are sitting there with bazookas. And the one guy goes, I think this is a ambush. And the guy they look at him and go, nah, no. Right? I mean, and then you see they're all running, So that's what this is. This is an ideological text to teach us that, we are so much better than them. Our training, we're strong, we're fantastic, and they are just little animals, little ants that need to be stamped out.
But with the imperiousness of a settler, right? Whether that's the United States, and then Jay, this is just tiny little comment. With the imperiousness of a settler, whether that's from the United States or from the Zionist entity, they have to announce them. They don't have confidence in it even, because at their heart, they are settlers. So every scene they announce, I wrote down how many times I'm an American or he's an American was said, including that training scene where they're training to kill the terrorists on the plane in 20 seconds or something like that. And the first thing he says is, I'm an American. Like, who the fuck says that as part of, but this is the sort of, these are the messaging that has to be peppered in, right? As they're, it's like the imagery is not enough, right? The imagery is not enough. We have to make sure to say, I'm an American. But what's important about that psychologically is that has traction in a particular meaning and is codified in a particular way. Already signals associative processes of who's good, who's bad, who's strong, all the things that this entire thing is constructed on.
It's an execution warrant.
Exactly, is condensed into, I'm an American. We are supposed to know what that means. And we are supposed to take home the message about why this is necessary with that proclamation. But again, this is the imperiousness of a settler. Then stop fucking, you don't have to say it every 10 seconds. I got it. You're American.
Yeah.
Like, we know what that means. Good.
Thank you both. Just a couple of different comments. One, Uzis are everywhere in this movie. This is not a U.S. military weapon, never has been, right? But it is a Israeli gun, right? And so that's just an important thing. And it also, I remember growing up as a kid, people, talking about Uzis as these cool guns, right? And like, so movies like this become a part of that kind of, propaganda for this Israeli company.
And I'll slide in. The Uzi becomes in the 90s a gun for like gang violence.
Yeah. And it's also used.
It's always invoked as like a thing of like this kind of thing, like the uncultured gun that is used.
Also sold heavily to like Latin American death squads and stuff like that, right? So also a gun that, as Alex Avina and others have done in their work, shown like that when Israel just supported all of these counter-revolutionary militias in South America, some of whom did some of the worst anti-Semitic violence, by the way, just in passing, but that they were often sold Uzis because this was one of the military weapons that Israel specialized in selling. So that's something interesting. Like, I looked it up. Delta Force never used Uzis, right? Like, another thing is dirt bikes. Obviously, there is this stupid dirt bike that, as you said, has the penis missiles in the front and the butt missiles in the back or whatever. But obviously that's not a thing. Like, it's just something made up for the movie. I think you said it earlier, Stephen, and people were saying in the chat, like the G.I. Joe-ification of films, right? Like it's cartoonish basically, and it fits, and it would have been like a G.I. Joe style toy. And interestingly, like the history, like G.I. Joe is very big in the 80s, and I know we're going to do something about it. Both Hiram and Alex Avina want to do, and maybe we'll do it together with both of them, do something on the cartoon. And there was a movie version of the cartoon as well. But those of us who grew up in the 80s, we might know the cartoon, which, I do, and Mtume does, but it goes back a long ways. Like G.I. Joe starts in like 1964, right? So it's like one of the first big military toys, and it comes out particularly with the Vietnam War as a way of promoting American militarism to kids. And so that's just an interesting whole bit of history around that. The dirt bike things, I mean, there was a comment from our last conversation because dirt bikes came up in the context of The Running Man too. And I just wanted to show this from Groucho Suave. A couple of things these city boys wouldn't know. First of all, I just want to say Philly dirt bikes are everywhere. So I can't explain why Hiram doesn't know anything about dirt bikes, but just in passing, he said off the top, it would be cool to talk to a stunt coordinator about how dirt bike sequences got really popular in action movie gags. Dirt bikes, hella popular with prime audiences of these crap movies, boys and young men. Economically, dirt bikes got way more accessible in the 80s due to a couple things, including Japanese production capacity. These are, they're Kawasaki's in this, so yes, Japanese. And imports increasing, big leaps in technology with each jump in capacity, fueling further sales via the upgrade factor, on top of the basic advantages of being more rideable on wider terrain, cheaper, and definitely gaining more market penetration because dependability catered to an average owner and a gearhead, or versus a gearhead, right? So I just thought that was a good summary from Groucho Suave on dirt bikes in the 80s, but they are very big. I mean, I think I referenced this in the beginning, but I had friends who had dirt bikes, and they thought they were the coolest thing in the world, and they looked down upon all of us who didn't have a dirt bike as, lowly peons. And I mean, it also gave a capacity of somebody who was like 12 or 13 years old, if you lived out in the country like I did, to actually be able to move almost like you had a car and to go see your friends on your freaking dirt bike while the rest of us were, you know, stuck to riding regular bicycles or whatever. And so nothing much more on that other than dirt bikes are also not used by Delta Force in real life or the military broadly either. They're not helpful from a military context at all. But, you know, none of that really matters. This is about selling things and pushing these cartoonish
You mean
things in the whole.
they don't do wheelies on tarmacs just
No.
as they're trying to grab the rope?
I think we don't know about that training. About every Delta Force I thought was trained to stand up on a motorcycle and try to jump onto a plane.
No, this is that deep state that we don't know about. This is that shit that we don't know, and they were connected. They were connected, but also no. But a bit more seriously, I think it adds to the Chuck Norris superhuman because they constantly need to make him singular, right? So like, yeah, everyone's in their truck. He in a dirt bike with missiles. It's that James Bond shit, right? You know, oh, he's the only one who could use it. If Steve James were trying to do it, he'd have, like, you know, fell off and he wouldn't have been able to make it happen. But Chuck is that special. But it also adds to this like jocularity that I think that American military loves to have. It's the America fuck yeah thing, right? Dirt bikes, right? I mean, we talked about it with Empire of the Sun, right? When the American military comes in and like it's hot rods, right? It's this. I mean, it's so putrid, it's disgusting, and so the dirt bike becomes like the new hot rod for the 80s, and Norris has to use it. And I mean, and like to kind of come like one of the things is like, because after they rescue the hostages, what do they give them? Budweisers.
Yes. What the fuck?
Budweisers. I was like, I forgot that. I fell out my couch.
I was going to say he's the Budweiser 007. Exactly.
He was also drinking Budweiser and eating, I don't know, steak or something like that, watching the news in the beginning. And when he decided,
it was eggs and Budweiser.
Yeah, eggs and like he's on his ranch or whatever, and he's like, "All right, fuck it, I'm going to Beirut to stop this TWA hijacking."
Exactly.
And there's a larger thing to be said, and I'll stop here, about the kind of Chuck Norris, the right-wing capture of martial arts in the United States, right? And associating things like martial arts with the Budweiser dirt bike. I mean, what's the truck he has when he comes in? You know, I forgot he lives on a farm, right?
The Bronco, yeah.
The Bronco, a Bronco, which, you know, in 92 takes on a different meaning, but we don't have to get into that one. But, you know, like, but the Bronco, these Norris and his right-wing pathologies and his embodiment and martial arts and all this stuff just becomes one big soup. And, you know, if anyone practices martial arts, you know how it is here in the US with you know, a lot of these, you know, these cultures.
It's also, I just say quickly, it's one of the things that I liked about the first season of Cobra Kai, right? Because they have Johnny, who's like the basically the fascists, you know, in the early Karate Kid films. And they're sort of making fun of all these tropes. Like he's now like this old degenerate drunk who's always like, you know, but yeah. But I think this is also a movie. I mean, that's a movie, both of the first two, because they're both in the 80s. We will have to do on Imperial 80s too, because the Karate Kid, you know, is very big also for pushing this and really, you know, yeah. I mean, we haven't yet even talked about Norris getting. I know that both of you, Stephen and Tume, are dying to say something about Bruce Lee. I mean, have we said anything about this yet?
So about Bruce Lee kicking his butt in Way of the Dragon. You know, I can't lie. I did watch that scene to kind of cleanse my my Chuck Norris palate. You know, because it's funny. Like I don't know how true it is. They try to say like they were friends. I don't really know if that's true or not. You know, but you know, I don't know. I didn't look it up enough. But one thing I did by watching Bruce in Way of the Dragon when he's beating his butt, Bruce has that eye like, I'm gonna kick this white man aside, right? He has that vibe in him, and I'm seeing invoked, when Bruce Knew what he was doing.
No, I mean, yeah, I think two things. Well, I've heard I've heard interviews with Chuck Norris about this, and he's just a dick, and he's just like, insinuates that he could have actually beat him, and that Bruce called me up and said, if I redo this, I have to win, so it was it was a fit, like, yeah, dude. But one thing about the actual scene is, in many ways, I think it's Enter the Dragon, right? And that Bruce Lee knew it. Like, what was the climactic scene was, Bruce Lee, who was really a martial artist and warrior, against a dick, right? A dick. He's just a dick with this crappy, very linear karate. A white man who, appropriates a Japanese art form and does it really in the least elegant, sort of beautiful way that karate can be practiced, right? So it kind of, it's almost to me like Bruce Lee. This was not irony. This was like realism, right? He knew this was the enemy, hairy ass, bad, terrible, sweaty, dirty.
But it's why you need
American
films like this that is Chuck Norris, right? And everybody else is like secondary. Which is to sort of pacify the imperialist ego,
yeah,
right? And the white ego that can't stand up against people who actually see this as a craft and an art and really commit themselves to this, which is why that scene, this is what it reminded me of. I don't know why this reminded me of, is that you not only need this film to sort of be a vehicle for him to show how he is, right? And that he's the quintessential American and that he's so strong, but also the imagery. I think it's after the ambush scene where you see him on top of the beacon on the hill, where it's him alone on that fucking dirt bike, right? And it's the sunrise and he's looking over.
Oh, right.
And then he points the missiles with his eyes. Like, it's to your point, Matilda, about like the precision of it. Here's this hero of all heroes, and he's at the top of the hill looking down on everybody else. And he's so magical and so powerful that his eyes can do the violence, right? Which I have to say, in terms of, if you're talking about an imperial gaze, is another confession. It's like, yeah, that is all you fucking need. You need to set your eyes on who your target is, and you have at your, disposal anything, made up or not, by the way, that can destroy the people that you deem, through your imperial and colonial gaze, as worthy of death. So there's so much about this film that is an imperial, that's how I read it, right? Not only just a fantasy, because we see the fantastical part, right? What is it? 1 minute to Showtime, like all these sort of fucking really ridiculous things, It's like it's like northern Beirut Beach. Why doesn't exist?
Northern Beirut Beach.
Well, I wish we could join you. The Israelis says, I wish we could join you. You've done it before, boys. Now it's our turn, right? It's just so, and then they become ninja turtle. I mean, it's all of this shit. They're ninja. Wait, I want to find this actual thing that they say here. Oh, it's a surprise party, just like the old days. Those bastards snaked us, boss. I'm going to get them, right? And then
when they move the
thing, right? And that's the imperial gaze, that everything's at your disposal, but it is marked by him sitting as the beacon on the hill in the sunrise.
But it also
just like the United States.
Well, it speaks. I don't want to jump to the end, but that also speaks to the end, right?
Well, I mean, the end is we know the end from the beginning.
The end is Shane, come back, Shane. I mean, it's a cowboy film, right? This is a cowboy film, right? They're all getting around and bye, and they're all, and they fly into the sunset. It's just like so heavy-handed, exactly that kind of.
The movie ends like it starts. That's yeah.
Yeah, no, you're welcome to jump to the end. I mean, I think we're kind of winding down at this point. So if there's anything else that you all want to hit or that, hasn't been said yet, or any individual scenes that, stood out that we didn't properly. I did. So one that I'll bring up is there's this moment where, and I'm gonna butcher it a little bit, but it's a scene of some of the hostages. I think this is actually a interaction between one of the original hijackers and the troops, or the Navy guys, and he says to them, like, "You're not our enemy," basically, which is like, it's actually a moment where, and then again, maybe this came because some of this stuff did within the movie come out of media reports. Maybe this was something, I mean, it seems quite genuine in terms of something that somebody from one of these resistance movements would actually say, right? Which is that, hey, we've taken you. We're going to take care of you until we get this exchange. We're here to negotiate this, right? We understand that you're actually not particularly our enemy, right? But the enemy is, the White House, right? Which is what he says, but like, it's US imperialism, right? Whatever. And but then he goes into this moment, which you referenced earlier on, of like him having this fantasy of, in the future, when he's going to drive a truck bomb into the White House, and then all these soldiers talking about, kind of, oh, you'll never be able to do that. You can't, you'll never get there. Da 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 da.
Argue with him.
No,
Exactly.
can't do that.
My dad's too strong.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so that was another scene that stood out. There are these moments, again, like you referenced earlier on, Lara, I think, where they do, they're moments where in some ways it's meant to humanize, but they really can't, like, they don't, and I don't even know that it is. It's almost like, I don't know quite how to describe it, because if you just took the script, maybe you would say, okay, like, this is a moment where he's connecting with this little girl and her doll, and he's connecting it to his own daughter, and these kind of things that would actually happen, similar to what you brought up, Stephen, about Leila Khaled and her, her own biography around this stuff. But then it always is undermined by this kind of cartoon villain, nonsense, basically, that has to be kind of worked in, where you don't actually want to humanize them. You want them to say this thing, but then to be like, ha ha ha, ha, my evil plan. Like, I don't know. Like, it's just, yeah.
This is one of those scenes. So I took verbatim notes because some of them were just, this is one of them. So he goes, it's your government we fight, not you. But one day we will go to your White House and it will go. This is the thing he said. And then the guy fights back and he goes, you won't get anywhere near it. Don't you even try. The White House is big. You'll need a lot of explosives. Like, he's giving like, why would you? And he goes,
that back door, don't go in it.
One day, right? And it's just like, but you said this was an actual allusion to something that actually happened. The tracht that they I thought that's what you had said. But yeah, it's I mean, this is the ones that I took so many verbatim notes of, these most ridiculous lines, like you're saying, that they just can't do it. They just can't follow through with the humanization.
I mean, in the end, look, you says, well, let's break it down to the very sort of, the bare, sort of the bottom line of the series and this film, which is, as absurd, and someone could argue, yeah, it's cartoon-like, it's not supposed to be taken seriously, it's just, whatever. But what it is, and what that it was produced by this particular studio and by these particular men with that particular star, about that particular event. The baseline is United States in 1986 needed these movies to make sense of their place in the world and their increased intensification of military interventionism. Mm-hmm. That's it. Like, all that's the thing in the end. As absurd, it's not about seeing, they're not going to see the absurdity. They're not going to, it's about really this being art imitating life, and this is how, like, it's articulating, it's giving us the language to completely see why we do the things that we do. Right? We live in a dangerous world with dangerous people, and our American heroes are going to take care of us. Right?
No, I think that's a prime point, because I do think 86 is like a midpoint, and then I think you see a big shift towards the end of the 80s, because we're going to do Die Hard in a few weeks, and Die Hard keeps this same kind of idea that these terrorists actually have no principles. They kind of change it to they just want the money, right? And these kinds of ideas, but then also just generally that excessive military force is needed. So if you hear something happened, and it probably got a little bombastic and it got a little hairy and a couple people died, and you might hear some things, know that, we can't tell you everything, but it was necessary, right? And this is not even a speculation. I mean, you would hear people say things like this, like, yeah, I mean, but it's crazy over there. Right? That's like the American phrase. And these movies are just these selling points. They are complete in cahoots propaganda, right? And that's it.
Yeah, I mean, the last point that I would just say, again, just to contextualize this for people maybe who just, didn't grow up in the era or whatever, is that, within 4 years, right, the US would be in the Gulf War, right, or their first war on Iraq, really. And I think that, again, like, if you were 16 years old when this movie came out, then you were 20 when it was time for that war, right? Or and then you were 31 when 9/11 happens, right? And so, like, this I think it's kind of hard. We've talked about it a lot in the series, so I don't want to belabor the point, but again, as we've talked about in the beginning, after a series of defeats or not really, unsuccessful interventions or smaller, kind of operations and things like this, that there's just a lot of work being done in the 80s to kind of boost the imperial confidence and morale to be able to do big wars, right? And it's not for nothing that, yeah, Reagan is the president, but George Herbert Walker Bush is the vice president. He's also deep connections to the CIA and is in the presidency when the first Gulf War, happens. And so, all of that is connected. Yeah.
No, also in the Reagan, to speak to the Reagan years, remember that this is the time that Ronald Reagan amps up military spending. Right? I mean, he enters into a military spending battle with the Soviet Union, and it is a reestablishment. I mean, it's after the sort of limp years of Carter, which follows the defeats of Vietnam, and that's why they get their toes wet with interventionism again with Grenada, and then George Bush takes it another step and does Panama. So it's all of these films are really essential ideological articulations to sort of remind the United States of its global position, and then a bipolar sort of imperial war, which, like you said, then Gulf War I comes out, couldn't have happened if the Soviet Union was still if it were still intact. So yeah.
Tume, did you put this on here? The scene of the dirt bike at
I
in
did.
the sunset area. Yeah.
This is, remember when we said about Paul Verhoeven when he said RoboCop becomes American Jesus? This is when Chuck Norris becomes American Jesus. at a sun, at a silhouette.
Overlooking the Holy Land that's promised to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Boom! Exactly, 100%. I mean, I don't think it's far-fetched to think that you would get that imbued inside your subconscious on some level. I caught that. I was like, oh my God, we're getting the silhouette shot with the sun. Oh, well, okay. I must now bow. Disgusting.
All right. Chat comments. So Hiram, Chuck Norris was the white Bruce Lee.
Hi, Hiram.
Good to see Black Liberation Media in the chat. I remember Chuck getting his chest hair ripped out and blown away by Bruce. You know how this shit looked out from outside the settler colony? No wonder they are fucked up. Yeah, I mean, much appreciated. And I saw this person also make a comment about, Lara and Stephen having to explain why they didn't watch this, as opposed to us having to explain why we did, right? And we were born in empire, I guess, would be my main answer to that question, right? Not that we would recommend it. And why do I feel like there was no parental screening for me in the 80s? Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of folks feel that way. I also think somebody else brought up the idea that this was specifically marketed to kids, and I do think that there's an element to that. I've said this before, but a lot of these 80s action movies, I feel like are action in general, I think, is a genre that's kind of like encouraged to bring like children to teens, into the theater for it, of like, oh, well, like you said earlier, Stephen, like, don't take it too seriously. It's just a fun movie. It won't be any, it's not going to teach you any bad things. It's just going to be people blowing shit up, kind of thing. Right. And obviously you can sneak a lot of heinous shit in through that, as they did in this film.
Just
Cena,
injecting empire.
Yeah, absolutely. Cena said, shout out to Cena, shout out to East as a podcast. Delta Force was part of a whole range of cultural texts that were parts of a Zionist media project to demonize indigenous people of West Asia. I think that's a good summary. Real Bad Arabs is a good film to teach college kids about anti-Arab film, Orientalism, etc. Y'all too can jump in too if there's anything you want to say as I'm pulling these up. Chuck Norris doesn't do push-ups, he pushes the earth down.
That was like a meme thing for a while, wasn't it? Online, I think, for a while, right?
It might have been. There's a whole song actually that I almost did of it. I decided not to, because it was making fun of Chuck Norris, but it was also doing it in such a way that it was like celebrating all of his achievements in a very, like, it was supposed to be sarcastic, but I was like, I'm not going to do that. Let's see. So this was about the Canon doc. Yeah, it is a complete whitewash for normies, but you do learn about how they operated. That's the thing, is like you can read against a documentary like that, because even as they're all talking, folks like us, like a normie who watches it is like, oh, Canon's great. This is why I love Masters of the Universe.
Well, all the comments underneath are like, I miss them so much. And I'm like, did you watch the fucking documentary?
Totally. This is a good question for both of you. Is there a book similar to Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa for West Asia? I've read bits in other works, but not deliberately put together in one place. One book behind me that I would recommend that is in that vein is Ali Qadri's Arab Development Denied, which is a similar kind of text, but I don't know specifically of others.
Yeah, that's
not off the top.
That's a Professor Stevens should know these things, but
We'll think.
Political economy is like.
Think on it.
Paul brought up O'Malley's "I'm Jewish like Jesus" bit from the priests, right? And then there was also the moment where the Russian guy said, "I'm not a Jew," right?
Exactly. And now I live in America. I'm Russian, but now I live in America.
And America has been so good to me. I was like, oh, we got to get that Eastern Bloc shot. We have to get that little shot in there.
Exactly.
Don't forget about them. Communism. Gotta get a little shot in there.
And now he has a camera around his neck, right? He's allowed technology.
Yeah. Martin or Martine, I started watching this on Tubi, and boy, this movie is really putrid. Thank you for the super chat, but yes, it is putrid. Um, one by one, a lot of my stars fall from the sky, but it has to be talked about. Thank you for this Hollywood Hasbara dive. Also, check out Indie Nile if you have time.
Yeah,
Thanks
they're
again
awesome.
for the
Lebanese
super chat.
drag artist
Mm,
who breaks down movies as well.
mm.
Jay Mufawad Paul, good to see you again. It's the worldwide conspiracy of terror networks you find in all these shit movies, so well organized conspiracy wise, and yet at the same time ultimately incompetent, right? And
Yeah, and the
brought
network
that.
was never Empire, right?
But also, the only competent ones are the CIA operatives, like Jolani in Syria.
Yeah,
It's not a
Right.
conspiracy when we're talking about capitalism or empire, but that's
Sean Price Bar, Michael Dudikoff, the American Ninja. We didn't mention that, although there is a connection, not to American Ninja. It's not to American Ninja, is it? It's to the Ninja series. So, but Canon put out both of them.
Yes,
But
the Ninja series. Ooh.
yeah, but the Ninja
Enter
was
the
supposed to be Chuck Norris, and he wouldn't do it because he was covered up. and I think that's it.
But
They do
the
say
other
something.
funny part, they get Franco Nero, an Italian actor, right? And they dub his voice with an
Yes.
American. And
Yes.
Franco Nero was like, and he was like, Franco Nero don't know no martial arts. He was like, I don't know no. I never met a ninja, is what he said.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to do something on Teenage Mutant
Yeah,
Ninja Turtles at some point too. But like
there's
the
one
whole building up of the ninja thing in the 80s is a whole thing too. But yeah, go ahead.
I just gotta say,
this is one of the scenes, yeah.
the big scene for the brother of James, what's his name? I forgot the guy's name. His big cameo in that his big like moment was he assisted Delta Force
In Beirut.
to infiltrate the Beirut airport. And how did he do that? Because he knew where the cotton field was.
So fucked up.
Where he then took the
It's
guy
not even a thing.
took them through the
Yo, I
cotton
was
field.
gonna
He was
ask
led by
y'all.
the black man
No cotton.
who cut me the thing in the.
That, thank you for reminding me. I was like, why are they in a cotton field? I was like, is this something I don't know?
Through a cotton field. Holy shit.
And then the next scene is like going around, like you didn't even fucking have to, you just have to do that, right? Number one, no cotton. No cotton.
Not there.
In Lebanon, not there.
Outside the airport.
It's not going to be there, but also he had to go through it, but everybody else could just fucking go around.
And yeah, Chuck Norris can do this like jump it with the someone put the ramp there. They missed that. But yeah, oh my God.
Cotton field.
Wow. They brought the brother to the cotton field.
Oh, that's crazy. Yeah, I had the same. I think I missed that line, but I was very much like, is there a cotton field there? You know, like, I thought your comment earlier, Lara, was interesting too about you wondered if they filmed it in a settlement, or you said it looked like a settlement in certain ways.
Yeah. That actually, the Jesus, just Chuck Norris Jesus fucking thing, when he looks over, that looks like a settlement. The way that it's set up, the sort of, the roads, the sort of buildings, all that, it looks like a settlement. But for those of us from Lebanon, the topography of Palestine. Like immediately, I was like, that's Palestine.
But also there was, I mean, actually, the topography slightly. You could see that they were shooting from inside 48, and some of the scenes, like the more kind of deserty scenes, like Cliffy, that was actually obviously the West Bank, which also not cool to be, producing films in occupied territory, which is what they did. No, that's a criminal thing. So yeah, you could see that they were switching around different parts inside historic Palestine.
Amazing. All right. Anything else before we wrap with this from either of you?
I mean, what else can you pretend you're making up, but
I
it's
think
real?
we need to have more nudity. They just failed the brand. Failed the brand.
They were trying to reach too much of a mainstream audience with it, I guess.
So,
All right. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna wrap this up. Thank you both for patrons of the Imperial 80s. We're gonna record, a little, as we've done a few times with a few of our guests. We have 7 of them already. A bonus episode where we watch some of the absurd clips from this film together and do a little mystery science theater, talking over them and whatnot. So that'll be out soonish. It's patreon.com/imperial80s if you want to join us for that. But Lara and Stephen, thank you so much. This has been great and really appreciate it. Appreciate all the work that you do. Pre-order Lara's book. Keep an eye out for Stephen's next book coming out. Check out the work that they have already published a lot. And Psychic Militancy coming very soon, right?
yes,
The podcast.
Shout out to Sina for helping me with that. Yeah, it's coming out.
Thanks
Awesome.
to both
Yeah.
of you.
Thank you
really.
so much
So,
for the series and for making the space where we could watch this and know that we're among comrades and be able to talk about it in this
thanks
way.
for emotionally extorting us to watch these painful things.
Yeah.
We appreciate it. Thanks for that friendship.
Yeah. I always think about Alex Avina saying, like, I think it's a little racist that Jay made me watch this movie. And
we have a penchant for this.
Alex gonna send y'all a message. He got y'all too, huh?
Yep. That's the kind of friendship we have.
Oh man, appreciate you all. Thank you to everybody in the chat for tuning in. This was great.
Yeah.
And we're off next week, and then we will be back. What's our first one in December? Is it?
I think it's Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, right?
Okay.
I think so.
I think we're gonna do Planes, Trains, and Automobiles for the first week in December there. So we'll get that up on the schedule soon. But all right, thank you everybody. Have a good 2 weeks.